What if I told you that the most profound stories from our ancient past aren't found in treasure chests overflowing with gold, but in rooms that have been completely empty for thousands of years? Picture this: you step across the threshold of a stone chamber sealed since the age of pharaohs. The air is still, heavy with silence. There are no glittering artifacts, no precious metals, just dust and shadows. And yet, every surface around you seems to pulse with meaning. The precise cut of the stones, the way the corridor aligns with the rising sun, the symbols carved with purpose into the walls, these aren't accidents. They're messages left not in words but in design. These empty spaces aren't abandoned, they're waiting for someone to listen. From the sun-baked plains of Egypt to the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, from the windswept highlands of Peru to the hidden caves along the Dead Sea, ancient builders created storage vaults that served as more than just safes for material wealth. They were expressions of belief, ingenuity, identity, and survival. Long after the goods they held have turned to dust or been carried away, the architecture remains a testament to human creativity in the face of necessity. These structures challenge everything we think we know about value. It's not about what was stored inside. It's about the care, the intention, the brilliance poured into creating the container itself. The emptiness isn't a void, it's an invitation to decode the priorities, fears, and dreams of people separated from us by millennia. Today, we're embarking on a journey to explore 28 of these enigmatic vaults, spaces that have stood silent and empty for ages, yet still speak with startling clarity. We'll see how a 5,000-year-old granary in the Indus Valley reveals a society's mastery of urban planning and food security. We'll descend into an underground city in Turkey, where communities carved entire worlds into rock to protect themselves from invasion. We'll stand inside tombs meant to shield pharaohs for eternity, and walk through monastic cellars where wine and wisdom were once kept safe. In each, we'll uncover how design tells a story that objects alone never could. So settle in, open your imagination, and get ready to see history not through what remains, but through the spaces created to hold what's been lost, because sometimes absence speaks louder than presence. So let's reorient our entire perspective on what history truly is. We are conditioned to think of the past in terms of things: the golden mask, the jeweled sword, the painted vase. These objects are dazzling, no doubt. They capture our imagination instantly. But what happens when they are gone? We are left staring at an empty room, and we often dismiss it as a void, a place where history has ended. But this is where the real story begins. An empty vault is not a dead end. It is, in fact, a clean slate. With the distraction of treasure removed, we are forced to look at the container itself. And that container is a direct reflection of the mind that built it. The precision of the masonry tells us about their mathematical knowledge and their craftsmanship. The alignment of a doorway with a specific star at a solstice reveals their connection to the cosmos and their desire to embed their work within the celestial order. Hidden symbols carved in shadowy corners speak of spiritual beliefs and rituals that were too sacred for public view. These are the things that outlast gold. Gold can be melted down, its form lost forever, but the intention poured into stone and mortar, that is nearly immortal. Consider the words of archaeologist Dr. Elena West, who has spent a lifetime studying these silent spaces. She observes that in these voids, we find the fingerprints of human thought, the planning, the rituals, the fears and aspirations that shaped these spaces. This is a powerful shift in thinking. We are not looking for what was taken, we are looking at what was left behind permanently, the very shape of their thinking. The thickness of a wall is a measure of their fear of invasion. The complexity of a locking mechanism is a blueprint of their understanding of security and trust. The presence of ritual niches or drainage channels speaks volumes about what they valued enough to incorporate directly into the architecture of safekeeping. Was it purely material wealth, or was it something more like spiritual purity, knowledge, or the promise of an afterlife? This approach turns emptiness from a negative space into a positive field of study. The silence is not an absence of information, it is a different kind of data. It asks us more nuanced questions than a full treasure chest ever could. Instead of just asking what was it worth, we ask what did they fear losing most. Instead of wondering who owned this, we ponder how did the design itself communicate power and authority to those who saw it. A massive, imposing treasury door is a statement all on its own, whether it is open or closed, full or empty. It tells common people that what lies within is beyond their reach, reinforcing social hierarchies without a single word being spoken. This philosophical lens allows us to see these structures not as passive boxes, but as active participants in the culture that created them. They were designed to perform a function, yes, but also to convey an idea. And that idea is still there, waiting for us to read it. This foundational concept completely changes the game. It sets the stage for our journey into 28 specific vaults, because now you will see that each one is far more than an empty room. It is a puzzle, a time capsule, and a story written in stone, waiting for us to finally listen. Now, let's travel over 4,000 years back in time to the Indus Valley, to a city called Mohenjo-Daro. Imagine the scene, a sprawling, meticulously planned metropolis, one of the world's earliest major urban centers, buzzing with activity, and at its heart, standing near the elevated citadel, are enormous, imposing structures built from carefully fired bricks. These are the granaries. To a modern eye, they might just look like rows of empty platforms and hollow chambers, but to the people of that time, they represented something far more powerful than mere storage. They were the very embodiment of the city's wealth, stability, and brilliant foresight. Their design is a masterclass in practical engineering. The entire complex was built on massive raised platforms, a critical feature to protect the precious grain stores from the seasonal flooding of the mighty Indus River. But the innovation doesn't stop there. The architects incorporated a sophisticated network of ventilation ducts and air channels within the walls. This wasn't just a random feature. It was a deliberate climate control system designed to circulate dry air constantly through the stored grain, wicking away moisture that would lead to rot and mold and discouraging pests that could decimate the food supply. This level of foresight is staggering. They weren't just building a shed, they were engineering an ecosystem for preservation. The location of these granaries is equally telling. They weren't hidden away on the outskirts of town. They were positioned prominently right next to the citadel, the administrative and likely religious center of the city. This strategic placement sends a clear, unspoken message. Control of the food supply was central to power. The access points and the layout suggest a regulated, organized system of distribution. It's not difficult to envision officials managing the inflow from harvests and the outflow to the citizens, perhaps as payment for labor or as a form of rationing. This points to a highly structured society with a remarkable degree of social organization. Archaeologists see these empty shells as powerful evidence of a surplus economy. A society only builds on this scale to store food when it produces more than it immediately consumes. This surplus could have been managed through early forms of taxation, where a portion of every farmer's harvest was contributed to the central granary, creating a communal buffer against future famines or droughts. It speaks to a collective spirit, a shared understanding that the security of the entire city depended on this centralized planning. The profound silence within these ruins today speaks volumes about their ultimate fate. The emptiness is a direct result of the city's mysterious and abrupt decline around 1900 BCE. The grain is gone, consumed, spoiled, or looted long ago. The people vanished, their voices lost to time, yet the architecture itself remains a silent testament to their genius. The enduring brickwork, the clever ventilation shafts, the strategic elevation, these features still tell their story. They whisper of a civilization that had mastered the challenges of urban living 5,000 years ago, a civilization that understood sustainability, risk management, and the importance of planning for the future well beyond their own lifetimes. This first vault, empty as it is, teaches us a powerful lesson. Sometimes the most enduring legacy is not the treasure that was stored, but the incredible intelligence and foresight that went into building the container itself. The granaries of Mohenjo-Daro stand as a monument not to what was lost, but to the brilliant minds who knew that true abundance isn't about having a lot. It's about knowing how to care for it, protect it, and share it for the good of all. Leaving the ordered streets of Mohenjo-Daro behind, we now journey to the rugged, sun-drenched hills of Bronze Age Greece. Here, a different kind of vault emerges, one not built for communal sustenance but for eternal, solitary prestige. This is the so-called Treasury of Atreus, a name given by later generations who could only imagine the legendary wealth it once held. In reality, it was a royal tholos tomb, a beehive-shaped structure that represents the absolute pinnacle of Mycenaean engineering and a profound statement about their view of power, death, and the afterlife. To stand before its entrance is to feel small, humbled by the ambition of people who lived over 3,000 years ago. The massive lintel stone above the doorway is a single slab weighing more than 100 tons. Just the act of transporting and positioning this monolith was a staggering feat, a clear declaration that whoever was buried within was a figure of immense importance, worthy of an almost superhuman effort. This wasn't just a door, it was a barrier designed to impress and intimidate for eternity, but the true marvel lies inside. Once you pass through the grand entrance and a long, walled passageway known as a dromos, you enter the main chamber. Here, the engineering becomes pure magic. The Mycenaeans constructed a soaring, circular dome using a technique called corbelling. This means each successive layer of stone was laid slightly inward, cantilevering over the one below, until the entire space was capped with a single stone at the apex. The precision is breathtaking. The walls curve seamlessly inward, creating a perfect beehive-shaped void that has remained standing for millennia, long after the roofs of lesser structures have collapsed. This was not just a tomb, it was a permanent, indestructible house for the dead, and the Mycenaeans weren't taking any chances. Above the lintel, they incorporated a brilliant architectural trick, the relieving triangle. This is an empty, triangular space carved into the masonry above the door, designed to redirect the immense weight of the structure away from the lintel stone itself. Without it, that 100-ton block would have surely cracked under the pressure. This single feature reveals a sophisticated understanding of physics and load distribution that feels incredibly advanced for its time. The experience inside this empty space is hauntingly acoustic. Even the slightest whisper is captured and transformed, swirling around the dome as a clear, resonant echo that seems to hang in the air. This was almost certainly not an accident. Archaeologists and historians believe this acoustic property was intentional, integral to the funerary rituals that took place here. One can easily imagine priests or mourners using this natural amplification to chant prayers or recite incantations, their voices seeming to rise and fill the chamber, perhaps as a way to communicate with the spirit of the deceased ruler on his journey to the underworld. The design, therefore, served both a physical and a spiritual purpose. It was built to protect the king's body and his grave goods from earthly thieves, while also facilitating a sacred dialogue with the divine. This fusion of the monumental and the mystical is what makes the Treasury of Atreus so compelling. The emptiness we find today is a direct result of that first purpose failing. Looters, perhaps not long after the burial itself, managed to break in and strip the chamber of its golden death masks, weaponry, and precious ornaments. They took the treasure, but they could never take the achievement. The real story isn't the gold that was stolen. It's the awe-inspiring ambition and ingenuity that went into creating this eternal vault. It stands as a powerful monument to a society obsessed with legacy, a culture that believed so strongly in an afterlife of opulence that they built a mountain of stone to ensure it would last forever. From the immense, echoing dome of a Mycenaean king's tomb, we now turn to a far more humble, yet equally profound kind of vault. We travel to the stark and beautiful wilderness of the Judean desert, to the sun-bleached limestone cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea. Here, the air is hot and dry, and the landscape feels both immense and isolating. It is in this harsh environment that we find the Qumran Caves, a series of natural crevices and grottos that were meticulously adapted into one of history's most significant libraries. But this was no royal archive built from stone blocks. This was a secret, desperate, and brilliant act of preservation by a community living on the edge of empire. The people believed to be responsible, the Essenes, were a devout Jewish sect who separated themselves from what they saw as a corrupt world. And in the 1st century, as Roman legions marched through Judea, their world was becoming increasingly dangerous. Their response was not to build fortresses for gold, but to create hiding places for words for the sacred texts that formed the very core of their identity and faith. The design of these storage spaces is a masterclass in passive conservation and covert security. The Essenes didn't construct these caves, they selected them with incredible care. The chosen locations are almost always high up on the cliff faces, accessible only by treacherous climbs. This served two vital purposes. It placed the scrolls in the path of the dry, desert breezes that constantly circulated through the openings, creating a natural dehumidifier that prevented the precious papyrus and parchment from rotting away. More importantly, the remote elevation made discovery extremely difficult for any Roman soldiers or looters who might be scouring the area. They weren't just storing scrolls, they were hiding them in plain sight, camouflaged by the vastness of the landscape itself. Inside, the adaptation was subtle but deliberate. They carved neat, cylindrical niches into the soft rock walls, each one perfectly sized to hold a specially designed storage jar. These jars, with their narrow mouths and lids, were the final layer of defense, sealing the scrolls away from dust, insects, and the elements. Some caves even show evidence of subtle markings or arrangements of stones, a possible code to indicate the contents of a particular jar to those in the know, while remaining meaningless to any outsider. The emptiness found in many of these caves is itself a powerful part of the narrative. When archaeologists began exploring the area in the 1940s and 50s, they discovered that some caves, like the famous Cave 4, contained a breathtaking treasure trove of thousands of fragments from hundreds of different manuscripts, what we now know as the Dead Sea Scrolls. But other caves were found completely empty, save for a broken jar or two. This void is not a sign of failure, it's a cliffhanger in an ancient story. It suggests one of two compelling possibilities. The first is a story of tragic loss. Perhaps the Romans did find these particular caches, and the sacred texts were seized and destroyed, their wisdom lost forever in a moment of conflict. The other, more hopeful possibility is one of successful retrieval. Maybe when the threat had passed or the community needed guidance, members returned to their secret libraries and carefully retrieved the scrolls for study and use, leaving behind only the empty jars as silent witnesses to a plan that worked. This shifts our entire perspective on what storage means. The Qumran Caves were not built for display or for grand administrative purposes. They were an emergency measure, a cultural lifeboat. The immense effort taken to haul writing materials, ink, and finished scrolls up these cliffs, to carefully place them in jars and seal them in darkness, speaks to a reverence for knowledge that transcends material value. They were not protecting wealth, they were protecting their soul, their lore, their history, and their connection to God. The very act of creating this library in the desert was an act of defiance against the crushing power of an empire. It was a declaration that their ideas, their faith, were worth more than their lives and were resilient enough to be buried in a jar and wait for centuries to be rediscovered. The profound story of Qumran is not just contained within the beautifully penned words of the Isaiah scroll or the community rule, it is etched into the very rock of those caves. It is a story about the incredible lengths to which people will go to safeguard their most precious inheritance, not gold or jewels, but the power of a written idea, ensuring that it can whisper across the millennia, even from an empty jar in a silent, sun-baked cave. Now we plunge even deeper into the earth, leaving the desert cliffs behind for the fantastical landscape of Cappadocia in central Turkey. Here, the ground itself is a soft, malleable canvas of volcanic rock, and beneath it lies one of the most astonishing feats of communal defense ever conceived, the multi-level underground city of Derinkuyu. This isn't a single vault or a simple hiding place. This is an entire subterranean metropolis, a labyrinthine world carved by hand that could shelter thousands of people for months on end. And while its vast storage chambers now stand empty, their profound silence speaks not of abandonment, but of a plan that worked, a community that survived and ultimately thrived because of the genius embedded in every tunnel and every room. To walk these passages today is to walk through a masterpiece of urban planning, all of it hidden from sight. The engineering challenges of building a city underground are almost unimaginable, yet the solutions implemented here are breathtaking in their simplicity and effectiveness. The most immediate threat to any large group buried alive is, of course, suffocation. The builders of Derinkuyu solved this with a network of over 50 sophisticated ventilation shafts, some descending over 100 meters to the surface. These weren't just simple holes, they were precisely engineered to provide a constant, fresh flow of air to every one of the city's 18 explored levels, ensuring that even those at the very bottom could breathe easily. Then there was the problem of water. They carved deep, protected wells within the complex, tapping into the same underground water table that supplied the surface, making the city self-sufficient and immune to enemies poisoning above-ground sources. But perhaps the most iconic feature is the city's security system, the massive, rolling stone doors. These are enormous circular millstones, each weighing nearly half a ton, that could be rolled across key passageways from the inside, effectively sealing entire sections of the city from invaders. The doors feature a small, central hole, which likely served as a peephole to identify friends or a murder hole to fend off foes. The organization of space within Derinkuyu reveals a highly structured society with a clear plan for long-term survival. This wasn't just a chaotic warren of tunnels. There were distinct, designated areas for every facet of life. Vast, barrel-vaulted chambers served as communal storerooms for enormous quantities of food, wine, and oil, the caloric fuel needed to wait out a siege. There were stables for livestock, complete with tethering rings carved into the walls and dung pits. There were dedicated wineries and oil presses, indicating they intended not just to survive, but to maintain a degree of normalcy and production. There were kitchens with blackened ceilings from countless fires, churches with carved crosses adorning the altars, and even communal rooms and schools. And then, fanning out from these central spaces were countless small, cell-like living quarters, providing private, if humble, refuge for families. This careful zoning shows an incredible level of forethought and social cohesion. Everyone had a role, and every need, from the spiritual to the sanitary, was accounted for in the blueprint. This brings us to the most powerful message of Derinkuyu's emptiness. We are not looking at a tomb or a city that fell. We are walking through a successful emergency shelter. The absence of artifacts and supplies isn't a mystery, it's the proof of concept. When the threat passed, whether it was from Arab invaders, regional conflicts, or religious persecution, the people simply gathered their belongings, herded their animals, rolled open the stone doors, and returned to the sunlight. They took everything with them because they no longer needed it down there. The emptiness is a testament to resilience and eventual normalcy. Archaeologists see this complex not as a relic of fear, but as the ultimate blueprint for disaster management. It is a physical manifestation of a community's collective will to live, a project that must have required generations of coordinated labor and an unshakable belief in a shared future. The silent, empty vaults of Derinkuyu don't tell a story of loss. They tell a story of profound hope, a story written in stone about the lengths humans will go to protect each other, and a powerful lesson that the best defense is not always a stronger wall, but sometimes a deeper, smarter, and more prepared sanctuary. Now we emerge from the dark, communal shelters of Cappadocia into the blinding sunlight of the Nile, stepping into a world where storage was not just a matter of survival, but an act of worship. Picture the sprawling temple complex of Karnak, a city of stone dedicated to the gods. The air hums with the scent of incense and the low chants of priests. And tucked away behind the towering pylons and magnificent hypostyle halls are rows of unassuming chambers, the temple storerooms. To the untrained eye, these might seem like mere closets, the back rooms of a divine operation. But their emptiness today is a gift, stripping away the clutter of objects and allowing us to see the profound sacred geometry and spiritual intent baked into their very design. This was not simple storage. This was a ritual act of cosmic conservation. The placement and architecture of these rooms were meticulously calculated to align with a higher order. Unlike the hidden caves of Qumran or the subterranean city of Derinkuyu, these storerooms were integrated directly into the sacred heart of the temple complex. Their doorways were often precisely oriented to catch the first rays of the dawn sun on a solstice or to frame a particular star, physically connecting the contents within to the cyclical rhythms of the heavens. This wasn't just poetic, it was a fundamental principle of Egyptian belief known as Mat, the concept of cosmic order, balance, and truth. By storing goods in a room aligned with the sun god Ra or the star Sirius, whose rising heralded the Nile's annual flood, the priests were performing a magical act. They were ensuring that the offerings, the grain, the wine, the linen, the precious oils were not just physically preserved but spiritually charged, maintaining the balance of the universe itself. The act of storage became a continuous prayer for abundance and stability, a divine duty to keep the cosmos running smoothly. This spiritual purpose is etched into the very walls. Even though the jars of offerings are long gone, the storerooms are often richly decorated with intricate hieroglyphs and bas-reliefs. The walls themselves tell the story of what should be there. We see scenes of bountiful harvests, of fat cattle and overflowing granaries, of pharaohs making perfect offerings to the gods. these weren't merely decorative, they were symbolic blueprints intended to magically ensure a perpetual, ideal supply. They depicted the world not as it was, but as it should be, in a state of perfect mat. The emptiness of the room today forces us to confront this artistry and intent. We are not looking at a blank wall. We are reading a divine instruction manual for how to sustain creation. The art was the eternal offering, outlasting the perishable goods it represented. Yet, for all their spiritual significance, these rooms were also masterclasses in practical security and administration. They were the bank vaults of the divine economy. The doors were secured with complex wooden locking mechanisms, often sealed with clay stamps impressed with the signet of a particular priest or official, creating a system of accountability that would be familiar to any modern auditor. The layout was methodical, with different chambers designated for specific types of offerings, one for bread, another for wine, another for gold and precious ritual objects. This highly organized system reveals the temple not just as a house of worship, but as the central economic powerhouse of ancient Egypt, managing vast resources, redistributing wealth, and feeding a small army of priests, workers, and artisans. The emptiness we see now is a direct result of this very practicality. As dynasties fell and temples were abandoned or repurposed, these meticulously stored goods were the first to be redistributed, not by thieves in the night, but by new pharaohs or communities in need, their earthly utility eventually overriding their sacred purpose. So the silent, empty storerooms of Karnak and Luxor offer us a dual narrative. On one hand, they speak of a sublime, almost beautiful world, where stacking jars of grain was a ritual that held the stars in their courses. On the other, they reveal the gritty reality of a sophisticated administrative state. This vault shows us that for the ancient Egyptians, there was no conflict between the spiritual and the practical. The perfect alignment of a doorway with a star was just as important as the complex lock on that door. The carving of an ideal harvest on the wall was as crucial as the real harvest stored in the corner. The emptiness allows these two stories to sit side by side, inviting us to understand that for them, storing the wealth of the nation was in every sense a sacred act. Now let's shift our gaze from the sacred storerooms of Egypt to the beating commercial heart of the Roman Empire. Picture the vibrant, chaotic port of Ostia, the gateway to Rome itself. The air is thick with the smell of salt, spices, and sweat. Dockworkers swarm over ships from across the Mediterranean, unloading exotic goods from every conquered province. And looming over this entire scene of organized frenzy are the massive, formidable structures known as Horrea, the imperial warehouses. These were not the hidden, secretive vaults we've explored before. They were proud, public declarations of Roman power, and their empty shells today are a masterclass in how architecture can be harnessed for pure, logistical dominance. Stepping into the ruins of one of these warehouses, you are immediately struck by the sheer, brute practicality of it all. The walls are incredibly thick, built from brick-faced concrete that was not only strong but also intentionally fireproof. In a crowded port city where fire was a constant, terrifying threat, this wasn't a luxury, it was a non-negotiable requirement for protecting the lifeline of the empire. But the real genius is underfoot. The floors are not solid. They are raised up on a network of low pillars or pilli, creating a hidden void beneath the entire storage space. This ingenious design served a critical dual purpose. First, it created a constant flow of air that circulated beneath the stored grain and other dry goods, preventing the buildup of moisture that would lead to mold and rot. Second, it created a formidable barrier against rats and other pests that could decimate a vital food supply. This was preservation through engineering on an industrial scale. The organization within these warehouses was a mirror of the Roman mind itself, orderly, hierarchical, and meticulously documented. The vast, open halls were often subdivided into smaller, secure units, each with its own heavy locking mechanism. This allowed for the simultaneous storage of goods from many different merchants or state suppliers, all under one roof but with clear accountability. Archaeologists have found countless inscriptions and painted notices on the walls which acted like ancient shipping manifests. They record the names of merchants, the type and quantity of goods stored, the dates they entered, and the names of the officials responsible. This wasn't just casual record-keeping, it was the backbone of a vast economic system. The Horrea were the physical nodes in a network of taxation and trade. Grain shipped from Egypt as tax revenue was stored here before being distributed as the dole to the citizens of Rome. Olive oil from Spain, wine from Gaul, and pottery from North Africa all passed through these chambers, their movement tracked and taxed, fueling both the treasury and the engine of commerce. This highly controlled environment reveals a central truth about Rome. Its greatest innovation was not just the sword, but the system. The design of the Horrea was a physical manifestation of the state's deepest concerns. Not just fear of external enemies, but fear of internal collapse through famine, inflation, or social unrest. By securing the food supply, they secured the peace. The phrase bread and circuses is often used dismissively, but the Horrea show the immense, serious logistical effort behind that simple concept. Keeping 1 million people in the city of Rome fed and happy was perhaps the empire's most complex military campaign, fought not on battlefields but in these brick and mortar fortresses of abundance. The sheer scale of these buildings, some covering areas larger than a modern football field, speaks to an economy of unprecedented globalization. The emptiness within them today is deeply symbolic. It echoes the eventual silence that fell over the empire's trade routes, the breakdown of those meticulously maintained supply chains, and the gradual fading of the centralized power that built them. But the architecture itself still stands as a powerful lesson. It reminds us that the flow of goods is the lifeblood of any complex society, and the spaces we design to manage that flow are never neutral. They are concrete expressions of our priorities, our fears, and our ingenuity. The Roman Horrea were not merely buildings, they were the physical incarnation of an idea. That stability itself could be stored, measured, and protected, one sack of grain at a time. Leaving behind the monumental, state-sponsored Horrea of Rome, we now venture into a world where storage was not about imperial logistics, but about individual survival and opportunity. Our journey takes us to the rugged, wind-swept coastlines and deep fjords of Scandinavia, to the world of the Vikings. Here, the concept of a vault undergoes a radical simplification. Forget grand architecture and complex locking mechanisms. The most secure bank for a Viking trader, raider, or farmer was often nothing more than a hole in the ground. Picture this, a solitary figure on a remote beach, perhaps on a small, rocky island just offshore. The only sound is the cry of gulls and the wash of waves. They carry a chest or a simple cloth bag, heavy with the weight of hack silver, pieces of cut-up arm rings, coins from distant lands like Persia and the Frankish Empire, and perhaps a few prized jewelry items. They find a distinctive landmark, an oddly shaped boulder, the base of a large tree, a bend in a river, and with a spade or their own hands they dig. The valuables are placed in the pit, covered over with soil and turf, and then, crucially, the site is memorized. There is no stone monument left behind, no permanent marker that would attract attention. The security system is pure secrecy, its effectiveness relying entirely on the owner's memory and the unremarkable appearance of the landscape. This was the Viking cache pit, a storage solution of breathtaking minimalism and profound psychological insight. The sheer simplicity of this method is what makes it so brilliant. In a society characterized by mobility, uncertainty, and frequent conflict, building a permanent, fortified structure to store your wealth was often impractical. You might be away on a long voyage to raid or trade for years. Your home might be vulnerable to attack from rivals. The Viking world was one of fluid loyalties and shifting power dynamics. Under these conditions, the best way to protect your portable wealth was to make it disappear entirely from the visible world. By burying it, you removed the temptation from potential thieves in your own community and safeguarded it from any raiding party that might burn your haul to the ground. The treasure was not gone. It was simply waiting, dormant and safe, until the moment you returned to claim it. The placement of these caches is a fascinating study in practical geography. Many are found on small islands or along navigable rivers. This was not a random choice. For a seafaring people, these were the highways. A cache buried on a small island near a common sailing route was like a safety deposit box located just off the main interstate, easily accessible when you were passing by on your ship, yet remote enough to avoid casual discovery by anyone not specifically looking for it. It was a system designed for a life spent in motion. This practice gives us a radically different perspective on what wealth meant to them. The contents of these hoards were not like the ceremonial gold of a pharaoh, intended for a static eternity in a tomb. Viking wealth was liquid capital in the most literal sense. That hacked-up silver was a form of currency weighed on scales to facilitate trade. It was meant to be used to buy a new ship, to purchase land, to pay a crew, to offer as a bride price, or to be melted down and remade into a new symbol of status. The act of burial was not a final act of renunciation. It was a tactical pause. It was a way to park your assets safely during a dangerous leg of your journey, with every intention of coming back to get them when the coast was clear. This is why the emptiness of these pits, when archaeologists find them, is so telling. In many cases, that emptiness is the sign of a plan that worked. The owner did return, dug up their silver, and went on their way. The empty hole is a success story. Of course, many pits were also looted, either in antiquity or by modern treasure hunters. And some were never recovered, their owners perhaps falling victim to the very dangers they sought to evade, lost at sea, or killed in battle far from home. These forgotten hoards, when discovered centuries later, become incredible time capsules. But even when found intact, the story is still ultimately about motion and temporariness. The Gotland hoard in Sweden, for instance, contained thousands of coins from all over the known world, a snapshot of a vast trade network. But it was still buried in the ground, a massive concentration of wealth taken out of circulation for a reason we can only guess at. The Viking cache pit, in its elegant simplicity, teaches us that security doesn't always require complexity. Sometimes the most effective vault is the one that leaves no trace, trusting in memory and the anonymity of nature. It reflects a worldview that saw wealth not as something to be put on display and admired, but as a tool for advancement, a resource to be deployed strategically in a life that was unpredictable, dangerous, and full of possibility. Their storage solution was as mobile and adaptable as they were. From the maritime hustle of Roman ports and the strategic secrecy of Viking hoards, we now journey to the sweltering, jungle-clad limestone plains of the Yucatan Peninsula. Here, the ancient Maya faced a challenge that defined their very existence: water. In a land with no major rivers and where rainfall, though seasonal and heavy, quickly vanishes into the porous bedrock, survival meant mastering the art of capture and storage. Their ingenious solution was not a grand aqueduct or a towering reservoir, but something far more humble and brilliant: the Chultun. These bell-shaped underground chambers, carved directly into the living rock, are a testament to a civilization that turned a profound environmental limitation into an opportunity for innovation, blending the deeply practical with the sacred in a way that feels uniquely Mayan. To step up to the narrow mouth of one of these chambers today, often just wide enough for a single person to descend, is to peer into a cistern of human ingenuity. The construction of a Chultun was a meticulous process, revealing a sophisticated understanding of local conditions. Builders would first locate a suitable patch of bedrock, then painstakingly chip and carve downward, expanding the chamber into a characteristic bulbous or bottle-like shape. This wasn't just for structural stability, though the rounded walls did help distribute the weight of the earth above. This shape maximized storage volume while minimizing the surface area exposed to the open air, which was crucial for reducing evaporation under the relentless tropical sun. But the real engineering marvel was the final touch. The interior walls were coated with a thick, smooth layer of lime plaster, carefully burned and mixed to be virtually waterproof. This created a perfect seal, turning a porous limestone hole into an impermeable tank. The placement of these Chultuns was equally strategic. They were often situated near the paved plazas or courtyards of homes and ceremonial centers, positioned to capture and funnel rainwater from stone-paved catchment areas. Every downpour became a resource, every surface a potential tributary, channeling the precious liquid directly into these subterranean savings accounts. This mastery of hydrology was a matter of life and death. The seasonal climate of the Maya world meant long, punishing dry spells. The water stored in a family's or a community's Chultun wasn't just for drinking. It was for cooking, for washing, for feeding crops during the initial planting season, and for sustaining them through the months until the rains returned. The very existence of these reservoirs allowed for population growth, social complexity, and the flourishing of their majestic city-states. A community's resilience was literally measured by the number and capacity of its Chultuns. But to view them as merely utilitarian cisterns is to miss half of their story. For the Maya, water was never just H2O. It was a sacred substance, the lifeblood of the world, connected to the rain god Chok and the deep, mystical underworld known as Xibalba. The act of storing it, of holding this divine essence within the earth itself, was imbued with profound spiritual significance. This beautiful fusion of the practical and the spiritual is etched into the archaeology of many Chultuns. While most were indeed simple storage pits, others reveal a more complex purpose. Archaeologists have discovered Chultuns containing not just water stains, but also strange and evocative artifacts, carved jade beads, beautifully painted pottery vessels, and even human remains. Some feature niches carved into their walls, perfect for placing an offering or a small lamp. Others have cryptic markings or a single, chilling sacrificial stone. These were not simply broken jars lost down a well. They were deliberate placements. This evidence strongly suggests that some Chultuns served a dual, or even a primary, ritual function. They became portals to the underworld, places where priests or rulers could communicate with the deities of rain and fertility, making offerings to ensure the timely return of the rains or to seek favor from the ancestors. The act of descending into that cool, dark, echoing space was a descent into the realm of the gods themselves. A simple task like retrieving water could become a daily reminder of the cosmic order. The emptiness we find in these chambers today is layered with meaning. In some, the void is a result of successful use. The water was consumed, the community survived, and the Chultun was eventually abandoned as cities grew and water management strategies evolved. In others, the plaster lining has cracked and failed over the centuries, allowing the stored water to slowly seep back into the very earth it was meant to defy. But this emptiness allows us to appreciate the shape, the craftsmanship, and the profound intentionality of the space itself. We are not distracted by the contents. We are focused on the container and all that it represents. The Maya Cholton stands as a powerful symbol of adaptation. It shows a people who did not simply endure their environment, but who learned to read it, to work with it, and to embed their survival strategies within their deepest spiritual beliefs. They turned a simple hole in the ground into a lifeline for the body and a direct line to the gods, proving that the most essential forms of storage often hold much more than just a physical resource. Now we travel to the heart of ancient Persia, to a landscape defined by its stark and beautiful aridity. Here, under the relentless sun, the most precious resource was not gold or silver, but something far more fundamental: water. And the Persian response to this challenge was not to hoard it in jars, but to architect an entire hidden landscape to summon it, guide it, and store it. Their solution was the Karnak, a breathtaking feat of underground engineering that transformed barren deserts into flourishing oases of life and civilization. This was not a vault in the traditional sense of a single, static room. Instead, it was a living, flowing network, a subterranean river system of human creation where the vertical access shafts themselves became a distributed, communal storage system for an entire region. To understand the Karnak is to understand a philosophy of survival built not on domination, but on a graceful and brilliant cooperation with the hidden forces of the earth. The genius of the Karnak system lies in its elegant simplicity and the immense coordinated labor it required. It begins high in the foothills of mountains, where snowmelt and rainwater naturally percolate into the water table. Persian engineers would first dig a mother well at this high point, confirming the presence of a sufficient aquifer. Then the real work began. Teams of skilled laborers, known as mukanis, would begin carving a gently sloping underground tunnel from the destination point, a village or a field in the arid plains, all the way back toward that mother well. The gradient was everything. It had to be precise enough to allow water to flow unassisted by gravity over distances that could stretch for dozens of miles, yet not so steep that it would erode the tunnel walls with violent force. This was mathematics and intuition carved into the earth by hand. As they dug the main channel, they would periodically sink vertical access shafts from the surface straight down to the tunnel level. These shafts, which from the air look like a line of massive anthills marching across the desert, served multiple critical purposes. They provided ventilation for the diggers below. They were used to lift out excavated earth, and most importantly for our story, they acted as a series of natural, distributed pressure release valves and storage points for the water flowing silently beneath the surface. This is where the concept of storage becomes beautifully fluid. The water wasn't held in a single, central tank vulnerable to evaporation or contamination. Instead, it was stored within the entire length of the cool, dark tunnel itself, protected from the desert sun by meters of earth and rock. The vertical shafts were not just access points, they were the community's faucets. A villager needing water would not go to a central reservoir. They would simply go to the nearest shaft in their area, lower a bucket, and draw up cool, clean water that had been naturally filtered through layers of sand and gravel during its long underground journey. This design was a masterpiece of preservation and public health. The water was kept at a consistent, cool temperature, preventing algae growth. The closed tunnel system protected it from dust, animals, and pollution. The Karnak didn't just deliver water. It delivered a sustainable, high-quality supply directly to the doorstep of a civilization. enabling empires like the Achaemenids to build magnificent garden cities like Pasargadae and Persepolis in the middle of what would otherwise be uninhabitable desert. The social dimension of the Khanate is perhaps its most remarkable feature. This was not a project commissioned by a single king for his own glory. It was a community endeavor that required and fostered profound cooperation. The construction and, crucially, the maintenance of a Khanate required the coordinated effort of entire villages. The system of water rights and distribution from the shared tunnel was governed by intricate and fair laws, often managed by a trusted local official called a Murab. The maintenance of the tunnels, which required regular cleaning to remove silt and prevent collapse, was a shared responsibility. The Khanate bound the community together not just by a shared resource, but by a shared duty. Its continuous operation was a testament to a social contract that prioritized collective well-being over individual gain. The silent, empty shafts we often find today, some dry and crumbling, tell a somber story of what happens when that social fabric unravels. The abandonment of a Khanate is rarely just about a changing climate or a dropping water table. It is often about the collapse of the communal knowledge and shared purpose needed to maintain it. The emptiness is a testament to a lost cooperation, a faded agreement between people to work together for the common good. The Persian Khanate redefines our very idea of a storage vault. It was not a space to hide wealth away, but a system to openly circulate the very essence of life. It stored water not by imprisoning it, but by creating a sacred, protected path for it to follow. This incredible invention allowed a civilization to literally make the desert bloom, creating pockets of paradise that were both practical and poetic. The cool, clean water emerging from the terminal outlet of a Khanate was more than just a utility. It was a symbol of life triumphing over a harsh environment, a victory won not by force, but by intelligence, patience, and an unwavering commitment to the community. In its elegant, underground channels, we find a story that flows far beyond mere objects. It is a story about storing not things, but possibilities. The possibility of life, of growth, of civilization itself, all nurtured by the collective will to harness a hidden river and share its gifts with everyone. From the flowing, life-giving Khanates of Persia, we now retreat into the cool, dim silence of a very different kind of vault, one not carved by nature and community, but built by faith and devotion. Step across the threshold of a medieval European monastery and descend the worn stone steps into the cellar. The air is still and cool, carrying the faint, ancient scent of earth, stone, and perhaps a ghost of the wine and herbs that once filled this space. Above you, the architecture itself speaks of a higher purpose. Vaulted ceilings curve upward like praying hands, and thick, Romanesque walls stand immutable, having shielded their contents for centuries. This is not the warehouse of an empire nor the hidden hoard of a merchant. This is the sacred larder of a spiritual community, a space where the practical need to store wine, food, and precious manuscripts was seamlessly woven into the very fabric of monastic life. Its emptiness today, often a result of the dissolution of the monasteries or simply the slow consumption of time, does not feel like a loss. Instead, it clears the stage, allowing us to hear the echoes of a dual purpose that define these spaces: the sustenance of the soul and the unwavering duty of charity to the body. Every element of the cellar's design was a physical manifestation of the Benedictine ideal of ora et labora, pray and work. The practicality is immediately evident. The consistent, cool temperature provided by the thick, subterranean walls was the perfect natural refrigeration for barrels of wine and beer, wheels of cheese, sacks of grain, and bundles of dried herbs and vegetables. This was the engine room of the monastery's self-sufficiency, ensuring the brothers could feed themselves and remain insulated from the worldly distractions of the outside market. But to see only a pantry is to miss the deeper story. The layout itself was often imbued with profound symbolism. Some cellars were arranged in a cruciform shape, their aisles forming a literal cross under the earth, turning the simple act of fetching a jar of preserves into a silent walk of faith. Inscriptions from scripture or the names of saints might be carved into lintels or painted onto barrels, a constant reminder that even this most mundane task was an offering to God. The locking mechanisms on the doors securing the best wine or the community's valuable documents were not just about security, they were about stewardship, a solemn responsibility to protect the resources God had provided for the good of all. This concept of stewardship extended far beyond the monastery's walls, and this is where the cellar's purpose truly transcends mere storage. These chambers were the central reserve for one of the medieval world's most critical social services, monastic hospitality and charity. The rule of Saint Benedict commanded the welcoming of all guests as if they were Christ himself, and the feeding of the poor as a sacred duty. The well-stocked cellar was the means to fulfill this vow. When pilgrims arrived weary from their journey, they were offered bread and ale from these stores. In times of local famine or hardship, the monks would distribute grain and food to the starving poor at their gates. The cellar, therefore, was not a place of hoarding for greed, but of collective hoarding for grace. Its abundance was not for display but for distribution, a physical expression of the Christian virtue of Carita's selfless love and charity. The design of the space, with its sturdy bins and organized shelves, reflects a value system that prized frugality, foresight, and above all, generosity. The remarkable emptiness of these cellars today allows us to appreciate an aspect often overshadowed by their contents, their atmosphere. Without the clutter of barrels and sacks, we can truly experience the acoustics of the vaulted space, where a single footstep or a softly spoken word is captured and gently amplified, hanging in the air with a reverent weight. This sonic quality was likely unintentional, a byproduct of the architecture, but it would have contributed powerfully to the ambience of the space. For a monk tasked with his daily chore of fetching supplies, working in this cool, shadowy silence, surrounded by the echoes of his own movement, the cellar would have offered a unique form of solitude and contemplation. It was a place of quiet labor that itself could become a form of prayer. The emptiness now lets us stand in that same silence and understand how even the most functional room in the monastery was designed to elevate daily life into something sacred. It tells a story not of renouncing the world, but of sanctifying it, of finding the divine not just in the choir stall, but in the simple, sturdy act of ensuring there is enough to share. Leaving behind the cool, dimmed silence of the monastic cellar, we now ascend quite literally to a world where storage was not just a matter of piety or practicality, but a breathtaking feat of statecraft performed against a backdrop of thin air and staggering mountain peaks. Our journey takes us to the high Andes, to the very roof of the Inca Empire. Here, at altitudes that leave modern visitors gasping for breath, the Inca engineered a solution to one of history's most formidable logistical puzzles: how to feed and supply millions of people across the most vertiginous and varied terrain on Earth. Their answer was the Qumran, a network of storehouses so vast and so brilliantly conceived that it functioned as the empire's beating heart and its ultimate insurance policy. To stand before the ruins of a Qumran complex, rows of circular stone structures clinging to a mountainside like swallows' nests, is to witness the Inca genius for turning environmental extremes into their greatest strategic advantage. The sheer audacity of their location is the first clue to their purpose. The Inca did not hide their storehouses in sheltered valleys. They built them in the most exposed places imaginable, on high, windy slopes, often facing the prevailing winds. This was not a design flaw, it was the very core of the innovation. At altitudes regularly exceeding 12,000 feet, the air is thin, dry, and cold, and the wind blows with a relentless, punishing force. The Inca saw in these harsh conditions a perfect, natural refrigeration system. By constructing the caves with strategically placed ventilation ducts at their base and designing them with circular or rectangular shapes that maximized airflow, they harnessed the power of the wind itself. It would constantly circulate through the buildings, wicking away any ambient moisture that would cause their stored goods to rot or sprout. This was climate control engineered 1,500 years before the invention of mechanical refrigeration, using nothing but an intimate understanding of physics and landscape. The thatched conical roofs, expertly woven to be both waterproof and insulating, completed the system, protecting the contents from the intense high-altitude sun by day and the freezing temperatures by night. Inside, the organization was a masterpiece of efficiency and categorization. These were not simply giant barns where goods were dumped in a heap. The interiors were often divided into multiple compartments or built as separate, smaller units, each designated for a specific type of product. One set of caves might be reserved for freeze-dried potatoes, known as chuño, a process the Inca perfected by exposing tubers to the freezing night air and trampling them to remove moisture. Another row would hold vast quantities of quinoa and other grains, stored in large ceramic jars to protect them from pests. Yet another complex would be dedicated to non-food items, stacks of finely woven textiles, spare sandals, feathers for ceremonial regalia, and weapons like slings and clubs. This meticulous separation reveals an administrative mind of incredible precision. The Inca state, which had no written language as we know it, managed its economy through the quipu, a complex system of knotted cords that could record numerical data. Officials using quipus could have easily tracked the inventory of each compartment, knowing exactly how many units of chuño were in Qulcan number 7 on a particular slope, ensuring a breathtaking level of control over a distributed empire. This brings us to the true revolutionary purpose of the Qulcan system. It was the physical manifestation of the Inca social contract. The empire was built on a labor tax system called the mitre, where every household contributed work to state projects instead of paying taxes in currency. A portion of every community's harvest was also given to the state to be stored in these caves. This was not mere hoarding. This centralized reserve was the key to the empire's stability and its profound ability to prevent famine. If one region suffered a crop failure due to drought or frost, runners from the Inca's unparalleled road network could carry a message, and supplies would be dispatched from a cave in a more fortunate area to support the afflicted population. The state also used these stores to feed the massive armies that secured the empire's borders, to supply the laborers building terraces and temples, and to provide for nobles and priests. But most importantly, it was a system of equity. By ensuring that no one under Inca rule would starve, the Sapa Inca, the emperor, fulfilled his divine duty to his people, reinforcing his power not just through fear, but through a guaranteed form of welfare. The caves were a promise made of stone and potatoes, a promise of security in an unpredictable world. The profound emptiness found in these structures today is a direct archaeological scar from the Spanish conquest. The dismantling of the Inca state apparatus was not just a political act, it was a logistical catastrophe. The intricate system of redistribution managed by quipu reading administrators collapsed. The caves were looted to feed the Spanish armies and their vast retinues of Andean auxiliaries. The knowledge of how to maintain the system, the social agreement that underpinned it, and the cultural imperative to keep it filled were all systematically destroyed. The wind still blows through their empty doorways, but it no longer cools state-owned potatoes. It just whispers through ruins, yet those ruins themselves are a lasting monument. They stand not as a testament to what was lost, but to the visionary intelligence that created them. The Qumran system demonstrates a fundamental truth often overlooked. The greatest treasure an empire can possess is not a room full of gold, but a mountain full of food, intelligently stored and fairly shared. It represents a pinnacle of organizational skill, where storage was elevated from a simple act of preservation into the very mechanism that held a vast, diverse, and mountainous empire together. Now let us cross from the high Andes to the crossroads of the world, stepping into a realm where storage was not about survival or statecraft, but about the spectacular display of imperial splendor. Imagine the opulent heart of the Ottoman Empire, the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. Here, in a complex of pavilions and courtyards overlooking the glittering Bosphorus, we find the treasury rooms. Unlike the wind-swept Qumran of the Inca or the hidden caves of Qumran, these chambers were designed not to conceal but to astound. They once overflowed with a staggering accumulation of wealth, the spoils of conquered empires, gifts from tributary kings, and the exquisite output of the palace's own master craftsmen. Thrones crusted with emeralds and pearls, solid gold candlesticks taller than a man, the legendary Topkapi dagger, and the Acoustics diamond, a teardrop of light weighing 86 carats. Yet today, many of these rooms stand largely, purposefully empty, their contents carefully displayed in museum cases elsewhere. This curated void is a gift, for it allows us to see past the blinding glitter of the objects and appreciate the true masterpiece, the stage itself, a brilliantly designed theater of power where every architectural detail was a calculated part of the performance. The very architecture of these rooms is a narrative of controlled awe and absolute security, a physical manifestation of the Ottoman mindset. The design is a fascinating hybrid, a clear legacy of the Byzantine grandeur that once dominated Constantinople, now refined through centuries of Islamic artistry and precision. The walls are thick, formidable structures that speak of impregnability, yet they are adorned with the most delicate Iznik tiles in floral blues and reds, and intricate latticework windows that filter the sunlight into a dappled, heavenly glow. This was not a contradiction, it was a statement. Power could be both absolute and beautiful, both fearsome and refined. The doors are massive, reinforced constructions of wood and iron, fitted with complex locking mechanisms that would have required multiple keys held by different officials to open, a system of checks and balances that prevented any single person from accessing the empire's wealth. Yet the handles might be inlaid with mother-of-pearl, and the frames carved with calligraphic verses from the Qumran. This seamless blend of immense strength and exquisite artistry tells us that for the Ottomans, security and display were two sides of the same gold coin. The treasure was not just stored, it was presented within a setting that amplified its value and symbolized the unassailable, God-given authority of the Sultan who owned it. This idea of the treasury as a stage is further emphasized by the segmented layout of the spaces. Unlike a single, vast hall, the Ottoman treasury is a sequence of smaller, interconnected chambers and niches. This was a deliberate design choice for both practical and psychological reasons. Practically, it allowed for a meticulous categorization of wealth. One room might hold ceremonial arms and armor, another religious relics like the mantle of the Prophet Muhammad, and another the most spectacular jewels and gold vessels. This level of organization points to a sophisticated bureaucracy, a class of administrators who could account for every item with ledger books as precise as any modern inventory system. But psychologically, this segmented design controlled the viewer's experience. A visiting ambassador or dignitary would not be overwhelmed by a single chaotic glimpse of unimaginable wealth. Instead, they would be guided on a curated tour from one breathtaking chamber to the next, each reveal more astonishing than the last. This was a form of psychological warfare waged with architecture and precious objects. The intended message was clear. The wealth of the Ottoman Empire was so vast it could not be comprehended in a single glance. It had to be revealed in chapters, each one designed to humble and intimidate the viewer, reinforcing the sublime power of their host. The emptiness of these rooms today allows our eyes to wander to the details that would have been overshadowed by the treasures they once held. We can appreciate the genius of a hidden compartment, seamlessly integrated into a wall panel, which might have held state secrets or the Sultan's most personal valuables. We can study the geometric perfection of a mosaic floor, each tiny stone placed with infinite patience, a testament to the countless anonymous artisans whose skill was itself a form of imperial treasure. We can admire the way light falls through a particular lattice window, illuminating a specific spot on the floor where a jewel-encrusted object might have been placed for maximum effect during an audience. These details are not minor decorations. They are the silent scripts of countless untold stories of intrigue, of patronage, of meticulous ceremony. They hint at the whispered conversations that took place in these rooms, the deals struck, the gifts presented to secure loyalty, and the awe felt by those granted a privileged view. The Ottoman treasury rooms remind us that the most powerful storage spaces are never just about safekeeping. They are carefully crafted environments, theaters where wealth is not merely protected but performative. The empty stage, with its magnificent setting and intricate machinery, tells us just as much about the play as the props that once adorned it. It shows us a culture that understood a profound truth, that true power lies not only in possessing magnificent things, but in mastering the art of their presentation. Now let's journey to the misty green hills of Iron Age Ireland and Scotland, where the very earth itself was sculpted into a different kind of protection. Here, beneath the rolling pastures and near the ring forts of chieftains, communities built not up but down, creating enigmatic structures known as souterrains. These are not the grand, state-sponsored projects of an empire, but something far more intimate and immediate, hidden underground tunnels and chambers that served as the ultimate safe room for a family or a small clan. To stumble upon one today is to find a secret world, a low, stone-lined passage that suddenly dips beneath the turf, often hidden by a cleverly disguised entrance that might look like nothing more than a rocky outcrop or be concealed within the bank of an earthen fort. These spaces, now empty and silent, were once bustling with urgent activity, and their unique design reveals a society living with a constant, looming threat, yet responding with remarkable cool-headed ingenuity and a powerful sense of communal trust. The construction of a souterrain is a masterclass in simple, robust engineering using only the materials at hand. The most common technique was corbelling, a method we saw in the grand Mycenaean tombs but scaled down for practicality. Builders would lay flat stones in concentric circles, each layer jutting slightly inward over the one below, until the space was capped with a large slab, creating a beehive-shaped chamber that was incredibly strong and stable under the weight of the soil above. Passages connecting these chambers were deliberately narrow and low, often requiring a person to crouch or even crawl. This wasn't just to save on digging, it was a brilliant defensive feature. An invading warrior, unfamiliar with the layout and likely clad in armor, would be funneled into a cramped, dark space where he could be easily ambushed by a single defender armed with nothing more than a spear or a knife. Some souterrains even incorporated more sophisticated traps, like false floors that led to a deep pit or pivot stones that could be used to block a passage from behind. This was defense through environmental manipulation, using claustrophobia and disorientation as primary weapons. But the purpose of these structures was twofold, and the less dramatic function was just as critical to survival. They were secure, climate-controlled larders. The constant, cool temperature below ground was perfect for storing essential food supplies through the winter and against the threat of famine. Barrels of butter, sacks of grain, and sides of smoked meat could be kept safe here, not just from human raiders, but from scavenging animals and the spoilage of variable weather. This practical use shifts our perception of the souterrain from a purely defensive panic room to a vital piece of domestic infrastructure. Its presence meant the difference between a community weathering a harsh season or a short siege, and one facing starvation and dispersal. The very act of building it was an investment in a future that was far from guaranteed, a declaration of resilience and a commitment to place. This brings us to the most fascinating aspect of these structures, their profound social dimension. Building a souterrain was not a solo project. It required the coordinated labor of an entire kin group or small community quarrying the stone, excavating the earth, and carefully placing the slabs. This was back-breaking, time-consuming work undertaken for the collective good. The knowledge of its location and layout would have been a closely guarded secret, shared only among trusted members. This created an invisible bond, a tangible secret that reinforced social cohesion and mutual dependence. The souterrain was a physical embodiment of the community's pact to protect each other. In a moment of crisis, when the warning cries went up and the torches of raiders were spotted on the horizon, the community wouldn't scatter. They would move together as one, descending into the darkness they had built with their own hands. Children and elders ushered into the deepest chambers, while the warriors took up positions in the narrow passages. The emptiness found in these spaces today is not just an absence of things. It is the echo of that collective breath held in the dark, the silent memory of a community huddled together, waiting for the danger above to pass. They stand not as monuments to fear, but to the powerful, universal human instinct to circle the wagons, to dig in, and to protect what matters most, not as individuals but as a tribe. Now we turn to a civilization that mastered the art of storage on an almost unimaginable scale, transforming it into the very bedrock of imperial power. Picture the heart of ancient China during the glorious Han or Tang dynasties. Beyond the bustling markets and grand palaces lay a network of silent, monumental structures that were arguably more critical to the empire's survival than its army, the vast imperial granaries. These were not the simple storage pits of a village or the fortified treasuries of a king. They were sophisticated, state-run institutions, and their now empty ruins tell a story of a bureaucratic genius so advanced that it still inspires awe today. To understand these granaries is to understand the Chinese imperial philosophy itself, a belief that the mandate of heaven was earned not through conquest alone, but through the meticulous, benevolent management of the people's most basic need, food. The engineering behind these structures was a direct response to a formidable environmental challenge. China's fertile plains produced immense grain surpluses, but its humid climate and seasonal rains threatened that bounty with mold, rot, and pests. The imperial solution was a masterclass in passive preservation. The granaries were built upon massive raised platforms of stamped earth and brick, lifting the precious stores high above the threat of groundwater and flooding. Walls were constructed with specially formulated lime plaster and layered with insulating materials like charcoal or sand to create a moisture-proof barrier and regulate internal temperature. But the true stroke of brilliance was the ventilation system. Strategically placed ducts and vents, often aligned to capture prevailing winds, created a constant, gentle airflow through the buildings. This natural desiccant wicks moisture away from the grain, keeping it dry and safe for years, even decades. This was a nationwide refrigeration system powered by architecture and physics, a testament to an empirical understanding of the natural world that was centuries ahead of its time. Yet the physical design is only half the story. The true marvel was the administrative system that operated within these walls. The Chinese state developed one of history's first and most sophisticated inventory tracking systems. Every single bushel of grain that entered a granary was meticulously recorded on thin bamboo slips. These early spreadsheets noted the exact quantity, the source, the date of entry, and the official responsible. The slips were then bound together into volumes and stored in archives, creating a searchable, auditable record of the empire's food supply. This was not mere record-keeping, it was the nervous system of the state. Officials could, at a moment's notice, ascertain the stock levels in any granary from the capital to the distant frontier. This data-driven approach allowed for a breathtakingly efficient and responsive system of redistribution. If a flood devastated harvests in one province, officials could calculate the exact deficit and coordinate the shipment of supplies from a surplus region hundreds of miles away, preventing famine before it could even begin. This entire colossal endeavor was deeply rooted in a powerful ideological framework, Confucian statecraft. Philosophers like Mencius had argued that a ruler's legitimacy depended on his ability to ensure the welfare of his subjects. A well-fed population was a stable, loyal, and productive population. Therefore, the act of storing grain was not merely an economic or logistical policy, it was a sacred moral duty. The granaries were the physical proof that the emperor was fulfilling his heavenly mandate. They were a tangible manifestation of the Confucian ideal of benevolent rule, a symbol that the state was a caring patriarch, proactively planning for the well-being of its children. The success of a dynasty could literally be measured in the fullness of its granaries. A full granary meant a prosperous and peaceful realm. An empty one was a portent of disaster, a sign that the social contract was broken and that the mandate of heaven might be withdrawn. The profound emptiness we find in these structures today is thus layered with a powerful, poignant irony. These granaries, designed to buffer the empire against the cycles of nature, ultimately fell victim to the cycles of human history. The very bureaucracy that gave them life could also become their undoing. In an empire's twilight years, corruption might see the stores pilfered by officials. Inept management could lead to rot going unnoticed until it was too late, or the granaries themselves could be looted by rebels or invaders, their contents seized not to feed the people but to fuel armies. The empty platforms and silent, echoing halls are a monument to this eternal cycle. They whisper of a time when prosperity was measured not in coins or conquests, but in the simple, profound abundance of grain, the ultimate currency of life and stability. They stand as a timeless lesson that the most sophisticated infrastructure is only as strong as the wisdom and integrity of the people who manage it, and that true power lies not in hoarding wealth, but in safeguarding the means of survival for all. Now we venture into the heart of the Arabian desert, to a city that seems to defy the very logic of its location. Imagine the scene, a vast, arid landscape of rock and sand, where water is a fleeting dream. And yet here, the Nabateans carved a magnificent capital directly into the rose-red cliffs Petra. The city's grandeur is legendary, but its true genius lies not in its ornate tombs, but in what is now absent, the life-giving water that once filled a hidden network of cisterns, channels, and pools. These empty reservoirs, now silent and often filled with centuries of dust and silt, are the unsung heroes of Petra's story. They represent a hydrological masterpiece, an absolute triumph of human ingenuity over one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. To walk through the Sick, the narrow gorge that serves as the city's main entrance, is to walk through the remains of a giant water catchment system, where every cliff face and canyon wall was engineered to serve a single, vital purpose: capture, store, and control every precious drop of water. The Nabatean approach to water management was one of breathtaking elegance and precision. They understood that in a desert, water is not just a resource, it is the currency of life and power. Their system began with a simple but brilliant principle: never let a drop escape. The entire city was designed as a massive catchment basin. They carved intricate channels directly into the walls of the Sick, guiding runoff from occasional rainstorms away from the canyon floor and into a series of underground clay pipes that were protected from evaporation and contamination. These pipes fed into a vast network of cisterns. Over 200 have been identified, carved like hidden pockets into the solid rock of the cliffs. The design of these cisterns was remarkably sophisticated. They were often bottle-shaped, with narrow openings to minimize evaporation and wider chambers below for maximum storage. Many were lined with a special, waterproof plaster that the Nabateans developed, a formula so effective that some cisterns still hold water today. But perhaps their most ingenious innovation was the system of settlement tanks and filters. Before water even entered a cistern, it would be channeled through small basins where sand and debris would settle out. In some cases, they even used porous sandstone to naturally filter the water, ensuring a supply that was not just abundant, but clean and safe for drinking. This incredible infrastructure was the engine of Petra's wealth. The city was not an isolated wonder. It was a crucial hub on the major incense trade routes that connected Arabia, India, and the Mediterranean. Countless caravans of camels laden with frankincense, myrrh, and spices would make the perilous journey across the desert. Their most desperate need was not for food or shelter, but for water. And the Nabateans, through their hydrological genius, could provide it in abundance. This transformed Petra from a mere stop on a route into a powerful, indispensable oasis kingdom. The Nabateans didn't just sell goods, they sold survival. They could tax the caravans for the water they provided. They could charge for the use of their secure storage facilities. And they could force traders to sell their goods in Petra's markets, allowing them to control the flow and price of luxury items across the ancient world. Their control over water was the foundation of their entire economy and their political influence. It was a monopoly on the most precious commodity in the desert. The emptiness of these cisterns today is a direct result of the system's eventual collapse. As trade routes shifted to sea lanes under the Roman Empire, Petra's economic importance waned. The meticulous maintenance required to keep the channels clear and the cisterns functional was slowly abandoned. Without constant care, the fine silt carried by the rare desert rains gradually choked the channels and filled the reservoirs, silencing the flow of water and ultimately the life of the city. Yet this emptiness is what allows us to truly appreciate the Nabatean achievement. With the water gone, we can see the perfect, smooth curves of the carved channels. We can trace the precise angles where they directed flow, and we can peer into the deep, dark voids of the cisterns, marveling at the sheer volume they were designed to hold. We are not looking at a failure, we are looking at a system that worked perfectly for centuries. The silent, silt-filled cisterns are a testament to a civilization that looked at a barren landscape and saw not scarcity but potential. They teach us that the most valuable storage is often for the resources we consider most basic, and that true innovation lies not in creating wealth from nothing, but in understanding how to harness the fundamental elements that sustain life itself. In the desert, water is more valuable than gold, and the Nabateans were the masters of its flow. Leaving behind the sun-bleached, pragmatic cisterns of Petra, we now descend into a realm of shadow and whispered prayer, into the very foundations of medieval Europe's most breathtaking structures. Step away from the bustling town square, away from the soaring heights of the nave, and find a small, often unassuming door leading downward. The air grows instantly cool and still, the noise of the world above fading into a profound silence. This is the crypt, the hidden heart of the Gothic cathedral. While the world looked upward in awe at ribbed vaults and stained glass, these subterranean chambers served a purpose that was both profoundly practical and deeply mystical. They were the sacred vaults, designed not for grain or gold, but for the most precious treasures of all, the relics of saints and the remains of the faithful. Their frequent emptiness or repurposing today is a blessing in disguise, for it strips away the clutter of objects and allows us to experience the raw, architectural power of a space engineered not for utility, but for transcendence. The very design of these crypts was a masterclass in sensory manipulation, all aimed at evoking a specific emotional and spiritual response. Unlike the bright, airy spaces above, crypts were often deliberately dark, illuminated only by the flickering light of oil lamps or candles. This strategic darkness wasn't a design flaw, it was a crucial feature. It forced the pilgrim's eyes to adjust, to focus on small, precious points of light reflecting off a gilded reliquary or illuminating a single, sorrowful carving. The architecture itself amplified this sense of otherworldliness. Low, massive vaulted arches, the precursors to the soaring ones above, created a sense of weight and ancient permanence, making you feel the literal and symbolic weight of the church above you. The air was often heavy with the scent of damp stone, beeswax, and incense, a smell that even today feels ancient and sanctified. Every element, from the coolness of the air to the echo of your own footsteps, was orchestrated to separate you from the mundane world and prepare your mind for an encounter with the sacred. This carefully crafted atmosphere was the stage for the most important function of the crypt, to house and display the relics that were the lifeblood of the medieval church. A cathedral's power and prestige were often measured by the importance of the saints it housed. A fragment of the true cross, a bone from a martyr, the skull of an apostle, these objects drew pilgrims by the thousands, traveling vast distances along routes like the Camino de Santiago. The crypt was the final, dramatic destination of their journey. The relics weren't simply stored, they were enshrined. They were placed in elaborate containers of gold, silver, and crystal, often set upon ornate altars or within niches carved into the stone itself. The journey to see them was itself a ritual. Pilgrims would shuffle through narrow, winding passages, perhaps pausing at smaller chapels for prayer, building anticipation until they finally reached the main chamber for their moment of veneration. The design of the space facilitated this slow, contemplative procession, making the act of seeing the relic a hard one, emotionally charged climax to a long and arduous pilgrimage. The emptiness found in many crypts today allows us to appreciate this architectural stagecraft in its purest form, with the reliquaries often moved to museum-like treasuries for security. We are left with the bare bones of the space itself. We can stand in the silence and truly feel the emotional impact of the low ceilings, the play of light through a rare slit window, and the way sound behaves in the confined stone space. A whisper can seem amplified, a single footfall can echo like a drumbeat, making you acutely aware of your own presence in a place that feels outside of time. This sensory experience connects us directly to the medieval mind. we can understand how this combination of darkness, coolness, and echoing sound could feel not like emptiness, but like a palpable connection to the divine, to the eternal, and to the countless souls who had stood in that very spot over the centuries. Ultimately, the Gothic cathedral crypt represents the pinnacle of storage transcending its physical function. It was not a closet or a warehouse, it was a medium. It was a physical instrument used to facilitate an intangible experience, the experience of faith, of connection, of collective memory. The stones themselves seemed to hold the echoes of centuries of whispered prayers, of desperate pleas, and of joyful thanksgivings. They stored not just objects but hope, fear, devotion, and the unwavering human desire to touch something greater than ourselves. In their quiet, enduring darkness, these vaults tell a story that goes beyond safekeeping. They tell the story of a culture that believed the most valuable things in the world were not measured in weight or volume, but in their power to bridge the gap between the earthly and the eternal, using architecture as their guide. Now, let's step onto one of the most dramatic stages of the ancient world, the Mesoamerican Ball Court. Picture the scene in a great Maya city like Chichen Itza or an Aztec center like Tenochtitlan. The court is a long, narrow alley flanked by towering, sloped walls. The air thrums with the energy of a gathered crowd, the scent of copal incense, and the intense focus of rubber-clad athletes. This was far more than a sport. It was a ritual reenactment of cosmic mythology, a game with life and death stakes, and built directly into the very architecture of this sacred arena. Often tucked beneath the grand viewing platforms were the storage chambers for the game's essential paraphernalia. Today, these niches and rooms stand empty, but their deliberate placement and unique design reveal a philosophy that saw no distinction between the practical gear of the game and the sacred instruments of a ceremony that upheld the universe itself. The equipment stored in these chambers was central to the ritual's power and meaning. Most crucial was the ball itself, a solid rubber sphere weighing several pounds, a potentially lethal projectile that symbolized the sun moving across the sky. Alongside it were the protective gear, heavy leather yokes worn around the waist, intricately carved stone hatchets that may have been used for striking, and padded guards for knees and arms. But these weren't just stored like sports equipment in a modern locker room. These items were themselves sacred objects, often elaborately decorated with symbols of deities, celestial bodies, and mythological scenes. Storing them adjacent to the court wasn't a matter of convenience, it was a necessity of ritual purity. The gear was kept in a sanctified space, separate from the profane world, until the moment it was needed to perform the divine drama. Their placement within the ceremonial complex ensured they remained charged with the sacred energy of the site, ready to be deployed in a contest that was quite literally a matter of cosmic maintenance. The design of these storage spaces shows they were conceived as an integral part of the ball court's sacred geometry, not an afterthought. Architects often aligned small niches or entire chambers with specific astronomical events. A doorway might be positioned so that the light of the setting sun on the equinox would pierce the darkness inside, illuminating a particular ritual object or carving. This wasn't just beautiful, it was a form of celestial timekeeping, physically linking the game and its equipment to the eternal cycles of the sun, moon, and Venus. The entire ball court was a cosmological model, with the playing alley representing the world and the stone rings mounted high on the walls symbolizing portals to the underworld or the heavens. The storage rooms were the backstage where the props for this cosmic theater were kept, their very location within the model giving them profound symbolic weight. Furthermore, the acoustic properties of these spaces suggest they played a role in the sensory spectacle of the ritual. The sloped walls of the great ball courts are renowned for their ability to carry sound. A whisper from one end can be clearly heard at the other. The adjacent storage chambers, with their hard stone surfaces and specific shapes, likely amplified this effect. Imagine the deep, resonant thud of the heavy rubber ball being retrieved from its chamber, the sound echoing dramatically before the game even began. The rustle of ceremonial garments and the clatter of stone hatches being handed to the players would have been part of an auditory landscape designed to heighten anticipation and awe. The emptiness of these chambers today allows us to test these acoustics, to hear how a single sound can be transformed into something momentous, suggesting that every aspect of the experience, from sight to sound, was carefully choreographed. This perfect fusion of the practical and the spiritual speaks to the very heart of the Mesoamerican worldview. There was no concept of a secular space. Every action, from storing a ball to planting a crop, was imbued with religious significance and connected to the stability of the cosmos. The ball game itself was a reenactment of the myth of the hero twins from the Popol Vuh, who outwitted the lords of the underworld in a ball game and brought about the dawn of the current era of creation. To play the game was to participate in that myth, to ensure the sun would rise again. Therefore, the equipment wasn't merely functional, it was mythic. The ball was the sun, the court was the world, the players were the gods, and the storage chambers were the green room for the deities, the holding area for the very tools of creation. The profound emptiness we find in these spaces today is not a void but an invitation to a vibrant imagination. We are prompted to envision the priests opening these chambers before a great ceremony, carefully removing the sanctified gear. We can almost see the players donning their protective yokes, each piece a weighty responsibility as much as a physical protection. We can hear the crowd's roar muffled by the stone, filtering into the storage room as the participants prepared for their sacred duty. The silence now allows us to appreciate the genius of the design, how a simple room for storing gear was seamlessly woven into a larger architectural symphony of alignment, acoustics, and symbolism. This vault teaches us that when a culture's spiritual beliefs infuse every aspect of daily life, there is no such thing as a mundane storage closet. Every space, no matter how utilitarian, can become a stage for the performance of meaning, a place where the physical and the metaphysical are stored side by side. Now we descend from the sacred ball courts of Mesoamerica into the cool, damp, and utterly breathtaking underworld of a different empire entirely. Imagine the vibrant, chaotic streets of ancient Constantinople, a city teeming with over 500,000 souls, a density that would challenge any modern metropolis. Above ground, the city is a spectacle of power and piety, with bustling forums and soaring churches. But beneath the feet of its citizens, hidden from the sun, lies one of the most magnificent and practical feats of engineering the ancient world ever produced, the vast subterranean cisterns. The greatest of these is the Basilica Cistern, a cavernous, phantom palace built not for people, but for water. To step inside today is to leave the modern world behind and enter a silent, shadowy realm where the air is cool, and the only sound is the constant, gentle drip of water echoing through a forest of stone. This is not a mere hole in the ground. It is a cathedral for a liquid treasure, and its enduring grandeur, even in its emptiness, is a timeless testament to an empire's ambition to defy nature itself. The logistical challenge facing Emperor Justinian in the 6th century was staggering. How do you provide a reliable, clean water supply for a megacity that is constantly under threat of siege, vulnerable to drought, and surrounded by salt water? Aqueducts like the magnificent ones feeding the city from the Thracian forests were brilliant but vulnerable. A single enemy army could cut the flow for months. The Byzantine solution was one of breathtaking foresight. Create a massive, hidden reservoir right in the city's heart, a buffer stockpile that could sustain the population through the longest of summers or the most determined of blockades. The scale of the basilica cistern is almost incomprehensible. It measures nearly 140 meters by 70 meters, and its vaulted brick ceiling is supported by a grid of 336 marble columns, each standing 9 meters tall. This was not dug out like a mine. It was constructed from the ground up, an artificial cavern built with the precision of a palace. The engineering is as beautiful as it is robust. The columns, many repurposed from even older classical ruins, are topped with intricately carved capitals in a variety of styles. The floor and walls were sealed with a special, thick hydraulic mortar that was impervious to water, a Byzantine formula so effective that it still holds back moisture today. This was infrastructure built to last for eternity, a permanent solution to an eternal problem. Walking through the raised wooden platforms today, the cistern feels less like a utility project and more like a sunken, sacred space. The sheer repetition of columns, stretching into the darkness and reflected in the shallow pools of water that still remain, creates an effect of infinite space, a surreal and hauntingly beautiful atmosphere. This was almost certainly an unintended consequence, a byproduct of pure function. Yet it reveals a cultural truth about the Byzantines. Even their most practical endeavors were infused with a sense of grandeur and a reverence for the classical past. This is most perfectly encapsulated in two of the most famous columns in the world. Their bases are not the typical plain pedestals. They are two massive, carved heads of the Gorgon Medusa, placed sideways and upside down. One is inverted, the other rotated 90 degrees. Their origin is a mystery, perhaps pilfered from a Roman temple to the sun god, but their placement was deliberate. Some historians suggest the Byzantines, who were devout Christians, positioned the pagan monster upside down to negate her petrifying gaze, taming a symbol of ancient terror to serve as a humble foundation stone for a Christian city's survival. It is a powerful metaphor, the new empire repurposing the artifacts of the old, quite literally building its security upon the inverted myths of the past. The profound emptiness of the cistern now, with only a few feet of water left for effect, is what allows this architectural symphony to be fully appreciated. When it was in operation, this entire breathtaking space would have been filled to the ceiling with millions of gallons of dark, still water. The columns would have been mostly submerged, the Medusa heads invisible, the vaulted ceilings looming over a black, mirror-flat surface. It was a functional, living organ of the city, its water level rising and falling with the seasons and the political stability of the empire. That functional reality is gone. The aqueducts were finally cut by invaders, and the cistern was eventually forgotten by the city above, its existence fading into legend until it was rediscovered centuries later. But this absence of its original purpose has created a new one. Emptied of its water, it has been filled with meaning. It is no longer just a reservoir. It is a museum, a concert venue, a place of awe and wonder. The void where the water once was now holds our imagination. We are free to admire the craftsmanship of each capital, to ponder the mystery of the Medusas, and to be humbled by the sheer scale of a project conceived to serve not a king, but an entire populace. The Basilica cistern stands as a powerful reminder that the most vital infrastructure of a civilization can, over time, transcend its original function to become something far greater. It evolves from a tool of survival into a symbol of identity and a piece of living cultural heritage. The silence where the water once sloshed now echoes with the footsteps of visitors from around the world, who come not for a drink, but for a connection to the ambition and ingenuity of those who came before. This vault teaches us that the legacy of great engineering is not always found in what it continues to hold, but in the empty space it leaves behind, a space that we, centuries later, fill with our admiration, our curiosity, and our enduring respect for an empire that knew how to build for both the needs of the body and the wonder of the soul. From the echoing, columned grandeur of Constantinople's sunken palace for water, we now travel across the world and into a different kind of community, one where survival was etched not in marble, but directly into the earth itself. Picture the high desert mesas of the American Southwest, a landscape of breathtaking beauty and brutal scarcity. Here, the ancestral Pueblones, sometimes known as the Anasazi, built their world not just upon the land but within it. Their most ingenious innovations are often the most humble, the underground storage pit or cache. These were not monuments to gods or kings, but silent, steadfast guardians of the community's most vital treasure, the harvested food that would see them through the long, lean months of winter. To find one today is to find a simple, often circular, depression in the earth, sometimes lined with stone or clay. Its emptiness is profound, but it is not a void. It is a negative space that outlines a positive, powerful story of ecological wisdom, profound cooperation, and a sacred pact between a people and their environment. The construction of these pits was a direct dialogue with the local conditions, a masterclass in passive thermodynamics. The ancestral Pueblones possessed a deep, empirical understanding of the desert's rhythms. They knew the earth itself held a constant, cool temperature just below the surface, insulated from the scorching sun by day and the freezing air by night. By digging down into that stable subterranean zone, they created a natural refrigerator, but they didn't stop there. The lining of the pits was crucial. Some were carefully faced with flat stones, creating a barrier that kept out moisture and burrowing pests. Others were plastered with a smooth, clay-based slurry that was baked hard by the sun, forming a seamless, impermeable seal. This lining did more than just protect. It created a microclimate inside the pit. The stored maize, beans, and squash would remain dry and cool, their respiration slowed, dramatically extending their shelf life and preventing the mold and rot that could spell disaster for a community. This was preservation through architecture, using nothing but an intimate knowledge of materials and physics. The placement of these caches within the village reveals an even deeper layer of their story. They were not hidden away on the outskirts or guarded in private cellars. They were integrated directly into the living space, often clustered in plazas or situated close to the iconic, interconnected dwellings we know as pueblos. This strategic placement speaks volumes about the social values of these communities. Easy accessibility was paramount because the stored food was a communal resource. In a society where survival was a collective endeavor, hoarding was not just antisocial, it was a threat to the entire group. The location of the pits reinforced a system of shared responsibility and mutual trust. Everyone knew where the food was, and everyone had a stake in its protection and equitable distribution. This was a physical manifestation of a social safety net, a literal commonwealth buried in the ground, ensuring that the elderly, the young, and the infirm would not be left behind when resources grew thin. The storage pit was therefore not just a container for food, it was a cornerstone of social cohesion. This deep interconnection between survival and society was underpinned by a spiritual and intergenerational dimension. The knowledge of how to build these pits, where to site them, what to line them with, and how to pack the harvest for optimal preservation was not written in a manual. It was passed down through generations, from elder to child, through demonstration and story. This was a living knowledge system, refined over centuries of observation and adaptation. It was woven into their cultural fabric, into their songs and their ceremonies that gave thanks for the harvest and prayed for its preservation. The act of storing food was not merely a technical task. It was a ritual of gratitude and hope, an acknowledgement of their total dependence on the whims of nature and the success of their own careful planning. The emptiness we find in these pits today is often a silent marker of a larger story of migration, a response to prolonged drought or other environmental pressures that eventually forced these resilient people to move on and adapt elsewhere. Yet, the enduring presence of these stone-lined hollows in the earth offers a powerful lesson for our modern world. In an age of industrial agriculture, global supply chains, and energy-intensive refrigeration, the ancestral Puebloan storage pit stands as a monument to sublime efficiency and sustainability. It required zero electricity, used locally sourced and completely biodegradable materials, and worked in perfect harmony with the natural environment rather than attempting to dominate it. It represents a philosophy of taking only what is needed and safeguarding it with the utmost care and respect. This empty space, therefore, is not an ending. It is an invitation to remember that the most advanced technology is not always the most complex. Sometimes it is the simplest solution, born from a profound understanding of place and an unwavering commitment to community. The silent storage pits of the ancestral Puebloans remind us that true security is not found in individual abundance, but in collective foresight, and that the most enduring designs are those that honor the delicate balance between human needs and the rhythms of the natural world. Now we emerge from the collective, earth-bound storage of the ancestral Puebloans into a world where wealth became abstract, mobile, and the engine of a new economic order. Our journey takes us to the bustling, sun-drenched piazzas of Renaissance Florence and the watery canals of Venice. Here, amidst a flourishing of art and ideas, a quieter revolution was taking place behind thick stone walls, a revolution in how society stored its value. This was the birth of modern banking, and with it the creation of a new kind of vault. These were not spaces for grain or sacred relics. They were fortresses designed to safeguard the most potent abstraction of all, money itself. Stepping into one of these early bank vaults was to step into the inner sanctum of a new faith, the faith in capital, in credit, and in the promise that a piece of paper or a ledger entry could hold the same power as a chest of gold florins. The architecture of these spaces is a fascinating hybrid of medieval stronghold and Renaissance artistry. The primary imperative was, of course, security. The walls were formidable, often several feet thick, constructed from dense stone that could resist not just thieves, but also the all-too-common risk of fire sweeping through a city. The doors were massive, iron-banded behemoths, but the true marvel was the locking mechanism. This was the era where the art of the locksmith evolved from crafting ornate boxes into engineering monumental security systems. Locks became incredibly complex, featuring intricate wards, multiple keyholes that required turning in a specific sequence, and early combinations that only a trusted few knew. These were not just barriers, they were puzzles made of iron, designed to baffle and delay any intruder for long enough to be caught. Yet, for all this focus on impregnability, the Renaissance mind could not resist beauty. The cold iron of a lock plate might be embellished with delicate scrollwork. The vaulted ceiling overhead might feature a faded fresco depicting the patron saint of the bank's founding family, or their coat of arms rendered in rich pigments. This blend of brute strength and refined artistry sent a powerful dual message. We are both powerful enough to protect your wealth and cultured enough to be trusted with it. The vault was not just a safe, it was a brand statement carved in stone and iron. This physical evolution of the vault mirrors a profound shift in the very concept of wealth. The treasures stored here were diverse. There were, of course, the tangible assets, chests of gold coin, silver bullion, and precious gems from newly explored trade routes. But just as important were the intangible ones, the meticulously kept ledgers, the bills of exchange, the promissory notes, and the binding contracts. These documents were the lifeblood of long-distance trade and complex loans. They represented not present wealth, but future wealth obligations and promises that stretched across continents and years. The vault, therefore, was not just protecting metal, it was protecting confidence. It was the physical guarantor of a system built on trust. A merchant in Venice could deposit his gold and receive a letter of credit, knowing that piece of paper would be honored by the bank's agent in Alexandria. This system of secure, centralized storage and documentation unleashed an unprecedented flow of capital, financing everything from Medici political ambitions to daring voyages of exploration. The design of the vault made this new, abstract economy possible by providing its foundational security. The emptiness we encounter in these spaces today, often repurposed as museum exhibits or elegant office buildings, provides a unique classroom. With the gold and ledgers long since moved to modern, high-tech facilities, we can lean in and study the ingenious mechanics of those early locks, appreciating the craftsmanship of each tumbler and lever. We can run a hand along the cool, rough surface of the stone walls and admire the fading artistry of a painted family crest, now divorced from its original purpose of signaling prestige. This void allows us to trace the entire evolutionary tree of security technology, from these beautiful mechanical puzzles to the digital keypads and biometric scanners of today. We see the direct lineage. The Renaissance bank vault was the crucial prototype, the moment society realized that as its economy grew more complex, its containers for value needed to become equally sophisticated. They were safeguarding the very idea of reliable, institutional finance. Ultimately, this vault tells a story that is less about the objects it held and more about the psychological foundations it helped pour. The rise of these secure spaces allowed wealth to transition from something that was hoarded privately in a noble's castle or buried in a field to something that could be entrusted to a neutral, professional institution. This was a monumental leap of faith. It required a belief in the stability of the institution over the longevity of an individual family, and in the rule of law over the rule of force. The Renaissance bank vault, with its imposing yet beautiful design, was the physical embodiment of that trust. It was the secure cradle for the infant concept of modern capitalism, protecting it in its most vulnerable early years. In its silent, empty state, it challenges us to see that the most valuable thing it ever stored was not gold, but an idea, the idea that confidence itself could be the most powerful currency of all, and that with the right protection, that confidence could build a new world. Leaving behind the stone and iron fortresses of Renaissance finance, we now journey to the very top of the world, to a landscape where the very idea of storage is turned inside out. Here, in the vast, silent expanse of the Arctic, the greatest threat to survival isn't thieves or invaders, but the relentless, all-consuming warmth of decay. For millennia, indigenous peoples like the Inupiat, Yupik, and Inuit mastered this frozen world not by fighting its cold, but by harnessing it as their most powerful ally. Their ingenious solution was the ice cellar, or ice house, a storage vault that required no moving parts, no electricity, and no manufactured materials. It was a chamber carved directly into the permanently frozen ground, the permafrost, a natural freezer that has preserved food and culture for countless generations. To stand before one today, often emptied by the very forces it was designed to withstand, is to witness a profound dialogue between human ingenuity and the ancient, icy heart of the earth. The construction of an ice cellar is a masterpiece of passive thermodynamics, a perfect example of working with the environment rather than against it. The process begins with the permafrost itself, a layer of ground that remains frozen year-round, often just a few feet below the surface. Families would dig down through the active, seasonally thawing layer of soil until they reached this solid, frozen foundation. They would then excavate a chamber, sometimes lining it with wood, whalebone, or stone slabs for structural stability. The entrance was a critical design feature, a narrow passageway, often with a steep ladder, that would be sealed with a tight-fitting door or a heavy lid. This wasn't just for access, it was a thermal lock. Cold air, being heavier, would sink and settle in this sunken chamber, creating a stable, below-freezing environment even during the short Arctic summer. The permafrost walls themselves acted as a massive heat sink, constantly drawing warmth away from the stored food. Ventilation shafts, sometimes crafted from hollowed-out whalebone or simply left as narrow air channels, were carefully positioned to allow for air circulation without introducing warm drafts, preventing the buildup of moisture that could lead to freezer burn. This was precision engineering achieved with an intimate knowledge of physics and materials found on the tundra. The contents of these cellars were the literal harvest of a life lived in harmony with the Arctic ecosystem. Inside, one would find the bounty of the hunt, quarters of caribou and muskox, slabs of whale blubber and meat, racks of Arctic char and salmon, and the vital seal oil that is a cornerstone of the traditional diet. The placement of these cellars was never arbitrary. They were situated strategically within the community, often clustered near the coastline or riverbanks close to hunting grounds, minimizing the distance to transport heavy, butchered game. More importantly, their location was a social landmark. A family's ice cellar was a known and respected space, a sign of their provision and their role within the communal sharing network. The act of storing this food was not an act of hoarding for individual gain. It was an act of collective responsibility. A successful hunt meant the entire community would eat, and the ice cellar was the bank that safeguarded that shared wealth against the uncertainty of future seasons. It was a system built on a deep understanding of reciprocity and the absolute necessity of cooperation in one of the planet's most challenging environments. The profound emptiness found in many of these cellars today is therefore one of the most poignant silences we have encountered. This void is not the result of a successful retrieval or a planned abandonment. It is the chilling symptom of a rapidly changing world. Climate change is causing permafrost to thaw at an alarming rate across the Arctic. These ancient, naturally frozen vaults, which have stood reliable for centuries, are now failing. Their walls are softening, their temperatures are rising, and the precious food stores within are spoiling, presenting not just an economic loss but a serious health risk from foodborne pathogens. This physical failure is paralleled by a cultural shift. The knowledge and practice of building and maintaining these traditional storage methods are fading as younger generations adopt modern electric freezers, which, while effective, are entirely dependent on a fragile and expensive supply of imported fuel and technology. The empty ice cellar is thus a powerful, double-sided symbol. It represents the loss of a sustainable, zero-energy technology perfectly adapted to its place, and it stands as a stark monument to the disruption of a way of life that has been intrinsically tied to the frozen landscape for thousands of years. Yet within this sadness lies a crucial and enduring lesson. The Arctic food cache demonstrates that the most sophisticated design is not always the most complex. It is the most appropriate. It represents a philosophy of resilience that is rooted in observation, adaptation, and a humble acceptance of natural forces. Where we might see only a barren, frozen wasteland, Arctic peoples saw a perfect preservation system. Where we might invent a complex machine to create cold, they simply borrowed it from the ground itself. This vault challenges our modern assumptions about progress and technology. It asks us to consider that true sophistication might look like simplicity. It might look like a hole in the ground, intelligently placed and perfectly understood, holding within its frozen silence not just food, but the accumulated wisdom of generations who learned to listen to the world around them and respond not with force but with grace. The empty ice cellar is a silent teacher, reminding us that the most enduring dialogues are not those we have with our own inventions, but those we learn to have with nature itself. Now we return to the very archetype of the ancient vault, to the sun-scorched barren valley that has captivated the world's imagination for centuries. The Valley of the Kings, but we are not here for the treasure. We are here to step past the broken seals and into the profound silence of a royal tomb, to understand that for the ancient Egyptians, these were not mere burial chambers. They were the most sophisticated storage units ever conceived, designed not for a lifetime, but for an eternity. Their entire purpose was to serve as a permanent, indestructible depository for the most valuable cargo imaginable, the transformed soul of a pharaoh, equipped with everything required for his divine journey through the afterlife. While the glittering artifacts of Tutankhamun capture our attention, the true story is written in the emptiness of the dozens of other tombs that were stripped clean. It is in their void that we can finally see the tomb not for what was taken, but for what it was always meant to be, a user manual for immortality, written in stone, paint, and celestial alignment. The architecture of these tombs is a masterclass in psychological and spiritual security. From the outside, the entrance to a tomb like that of Ramesses VI was designed to disappear, a carefully concealed fissure in the rock face meant to be forgotten after the royal burial. But the real genius begins inside. The layout is a deliberate labyrinth of deception and protection. Long, descending corridors suddenly twist and turn, breaking sight lines and creating confusion. They were often punctuated by deep ritual pits dug into the floor that served a dual purpose. Symbolically, they represented the watery abyss of the underworld, a chaotic barrier the king's spirit had to cross. Practically, they were formidable obstacles for any would-be tomb robber, forcing them to navigate a treacherous drop in near-total darkness. Further in, false doors were carved into walls, leading nowhere, and decoy chambers were fully painted and finished, wasting the time and effort of any thief who broke into them. The actual burial chamber was the heart of this defensive maze, often hidden behind multiple antechambers and secured with portcullises, enormous slabs of granite that could be dropped into place to block the corridor, their immense weight a final, desperate attempt to bar the way. Every inch of the design reveals a culture engaged in a perpetual arms race against the greed of the living, a desperate attempt to protect the king's eternal voyage from earthly disruption. Yet, with the treasures looted, our attention is drawn away from the empty sarcophagus and upward to the true treasure that could not be stolen, the ceiling. In tomb after empty tomb, the vaulted ceilings unveil a breathtaking celestial map. Painted in brilliant, enduring blues and golds are intricate charts of the night sky constellations, star clocks, and the path of the sun god Ra as his bark travels through the 12 hours of the night. The entire burial chamber becomes a microcosm of the universe, a perfect model designed to orient the king's soul not in the world of the dead, but in the cosmos itself. The walls themselves are not bare, They are covered from floor to ceiling in a dense, beautiful script of hieroglyphs and vivid paintings. This is not decoration, it is a literal guidebook. These are the spells from the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead, a collection of instructions, passwords, and divine affirmations the king's spirit would need to navigate the treacherous landscape of the Juat, the Egyptian underworld. He would need to know the names of the demons guarding each gate, the right answers to give at his final judgment before Osiris, and the magical formulas to transform his soul into an Ak, a glorious, effective spirit able to travel with the gods. The tomb was a library of the soul, storing the essential knowledge for the ultimate journey. This transforms our entire understanding of the Egyptian royal tomb. It was not a static storehouse for objects, it was a dynamic ritual machine. The objects themselves, the furniture, the food, the chariots, the Shabti dolls were not just wealth. They were fuel and functional tools for the afterlife, magically activated by the spells painted on the walls around them. The intricate alignment of some tombs with specific astronomical events, like the winter solstice sunrise illuminating the inner chamber, further underscores this purpose. It was a machine designed to harness the power of the cosmos to assist in the king's rebirth and ascension. The emptiness we find today, therefore, is not a void of failure. It is a sacred space where the distraction of gold has been removed, allowing the tomb's true function to shine through with brilliant clarity. We are left with the philosophical and spiritual blueprint. The story these empty walls tell is not one of greed, but of a breathtaking, all-consuming obsession with eternity. It is the story of a culture that devoted its greatest artistic, architectural, and intellectual resources to solving the one problem that has haunted humanity since the beginning, the problem of death. They may not have achieved physical immortality for their mummies, but in trying, they created something that has indeed lasted for eternity, their profound, beautiful, and enduring answer to the silence of the grave, written in a language of stars and spells across the stone walls of a vault designed for a god-king's soul. But now, the rhythmic clatter of the loom and the hiss of the steam engine beckon us forward in time, to a new kind of vault born not of empire or faith, but of pure, unadulterated momentum. Leave behind the silent, spiritual crypts and step instead into the thunderous heart of the 18th century, into the soaring, brick-built cathedrals of the Industrial Revolution. These are the warehouses of Manchester, Liverpool, and Birmingham monumental structures that served as the literal granaries for the new god of industry. Their scale is the first shock. They are not rooms or chambers, but entire landscapes under a single roof, vast enough to swallow a medieval village whole. And while many stand empty or repurposed today, their cavernous silence is not a whisper of loss, but a roaring echo of the moment the entire world shifted its gears. This is where raw materials from across the globe were processed into the stuff of modern life, and the architecture itself was the engine of this transformation. Every single design element of these warehouses was a direct response to the frantic, unprecedented demands of mass production. The most striking feature is the proliferation of enormous, multi-paned windows that blanket the upper walls. This was the age of steam, but it was also still the age of human hands and eyes. This deliberate flooding of the interior with natural light was a critical efficiency measure. It allowed workers to sort cotton from India, grade tobacco from the Americas, and package finished goods for export with a speed and accuracy impossible in the dim, candlelit storerooms of the past. It was an architecture of clarity and precision, designed to eliminate error and maximize throughput. Then, consider the ground floor, where the solid brick walls are punctuated by massive, arched openings leading to newly built canals and later railway sidings. These are the loading bays, the direct physical interface between the global supply chain and the factory floor. The design facilitated a continuous, flowing motion, raw materials flowing in one end, finished products flowing out the other. The building itself became a kind of mechanical digestive system for commodities, and its layout was engineered for seamless ingestion and expulsion. This relentless focus on flow was matched by a new and desperate obsession with prevention, the prevention of fire. The industrial city was a tinderbox. The same brick that built these warehouses also built the tightly packed worker tenements surrounding them. A single spark from a steam engine could, and often did, wipe out entire city blocks. The industrial warehouse was therefore an early experiment in fireproofing. Cast iron, that quintessential material of the era, was incorporated into the very bones of the structures. Supporting columns and internal frameworks were made of it, as it was far more resistant to collapse in intense heat than wood. Floors were made of stone flags or early forms of concrete. The extensive use of brick itself was a firebreak. This was architecture born of paranoia, a direct reaction to the terrifying new risks concentrated in these urban centers. The warehouse had to be a fortress not against foreign armies, but against the very energy that powered its own existence. The profound emptiness found in these spaces today is a direct consequence of their own success. The logistical systems they pioneered became so efficient that they eventually rendered the buildings themselves obsolete. The scale of global trade now requires container ships and automated distribution centers located on the outskirts of cities, not multi-story brick buildings in dense urban cores. The silence that now hangs in these vast, sun-drenched spaces is therefore deeply ironic. It is the sound of progress having moved on, but to walk through one is to feel the ghost of that energy. You can almost hear the shouts of dockworkers, the rumble of handcarts over flagstones, and the distant whistle of a steam train announcing another delivery. The sheer volume of the void is what speaks loudest. It forces you to comprehend the immense quantity of stuff, the bales, the barrels, the crates that once passed through here, fueling the engine of the modern world. This final evolution of the vault redefines the concept entirely. It was no longer a static container for safeguarding treasure or knowledge. It was a dynamic, transformative nexus. It was the critical intermediary that made mass production possible by solving the problems of bulk storage, efficient distribution, and secure inventory. The design of the industrial warehouse didn't just facilitate the new economy. It actively enabled it, providing the physical framework for a system of production and consumption on a scale the world had never before imagined. In its silent, empty state, it stands as a monument to a new kind of power, not the power of kings or priests, but the raw, world-altering power of logistics, a power that reshaped continents, built fortunes, and packaged the very progress of humanity into crates, ready for shipping. Leaving behind the thunderous, soot-stained brick cathedrals of industry, we now ascend into a realm of pure, rarefied air and silence. Our journey takes us to the very roof of the world, to the remote, wind-swept monasteries perched like eagles' nests on the cliffs of the Himalayas. Here, in this breathtaking isolation, the very concept of a vault undergoes its most profound spiritual transformation. We are not here to find stores of grain or gold, but something considered infinitely more precious, the accumulated wisdom of enlightenment itself. These are the monastery treasuries, and to step into one is to enter a sanctuary of preservation, where every architectural and practical decision was guided by a single, sacred duty: to protect the living heart of a spiritual tradition from the ravages of both time and turmoil. The emptiness found in some of these chambers today is not a mark of failure, but a powerful, poignant lesson in the Buddhist principle of impermanence. making the enduring design of the space itself an even more powerful testament to unwavering devotion. The construction of these treasury rooms is a masterclass in passive, holistic conservation, born from a deep understanding of the local environment and its threats. The primary adversary in the high Himalayas is not theft but moisture. The damp, cold air that clings to the stone walls of a monastery is a silent destroyer of the delicate materials it safeguards: the centuries-old manuscripts written on handmade paper, the vibrantly painted Thangka scrolls on cotton or silk, and the intricate ritual objects made of wood, clay, and metal. The solution was ingenious climate control achieved through architecture. These rooms were often situated on the sunniest side of the monastery complex, their walls built extra thick to insulate against the outside cold and to create a stable internal temperature that would prevent condensation. But the real genius was in the ventilation. Small, strategically placed vents were crafted high on the walls, often covered with intricate wooden lattices that allowed for a constant, gentle exchange of air. This subtle breeze, channeled through the room, was the unseen guardian, constantly wicking away the ambient moisture that would otherwise cause the sacred texts to mold and the paints of the Thangkas to flake and fade into nothingness. Within this carefully controlled environment, the storage methods themselves were acts of reverence. The sacred texts, often comprising the entire Kangya and Tengya, the words of the Buddha and the commentaries upon them, were not merely stacked on shelves. They were wrapped in special cloths, often of rich brocade, and placed upright in individual compartments within massive, beautifully carved wooden cabinets. This wasn't just organization, it was a form of handling ritual. The cabinets themselves were considered sacred, their surfaces frequently painted with symbols of wisdom and protection, like the endless knot or the lotus flower. To protect these irreplaceable items from insects, the monks employed a natural, aromatic arsenal. They would place bundles of native herbs like Himalayan cedar, juniper, and specific pungent roots within the cabinets. These herbal repellents filled the air with a sacred scent, a fragrant offering that also happened to deter moths and other pests from devouring the paper and cloth. This fusion of practical science and spiritual practice is a hallmark of the tradition. The physical protection of the wisdom was itself a spiritual practice, a form of active gratitude for the teachings. The layout of the treasury within the monastery complex is equally symbolic. It is never an afterthought or a basement storage room. It is often positioned adjacent to the most important temple, or directly behind the main altar, physically connecting the words of the doctrine to the space where they are practiced and embodied. In some traditions, the treasury is considered the literal mind of the monastery, while the main temple is its heart. This strategic placement underscores a fundamental belief that the wisdom contained in these texts is not a relic of the past, but a living, breathing guide for daily life. The emptiness encountered in some of these treasuries, often a result of the tragic upheavals of the 20th century, therefore carries a devastating weight. It speaks of a violent disruption of this careful, centuries-long project of preservation. Yet, even in their void, these spaces hold power. They become places of quiet contemplation on the core Buddhist tenet of anicca, impermanence. The empty cabinet where a scripture once rested becomes a teaching in itself, a reminder that all compounded things, even the most sacred, are subject to change. But this emptiness also highlights the true, unshakable value, which lies not in the object, but in the continuity of the knowledge and the intention behind its preservation. Many monasteries, despite losing their physical libraries, have managed to preserve their lineage because the teachings were also stored in the most resilient vault of all, the minds of the masters and the oral traditions passed down through generations. The surviving architecture of the treasury, the clever vents, the sturdy cabinets, the symbolic layout stands as a permanent record of that intention. It is a stone and wood manifestation of a culture's deepest commitment. This vault ultimately shows us that the highest form of storage is an act of profound faith and love. It is a promise made to the future, a declaration that certain truths are so essential to our humanity that they must be protected with every ounce of ingenuity and devotion we possess. The Himalayan monastery treasury safeguards more than objects. It safeguards a path to understanding, ensuring that the lamp of wisdom, once lit, will never be extinguished, even if the individual flames must sometimes be carried through the darkness to be relit elsewhere. Descending into the Roman catacombs is an experience that separates you from the modern world in an instant. The noise and light of the city above fade away, replaced by a profound, cool silence and the dim glow of artificial lights reflecting off rough-hewn walls. You find yourself in a labyrinth, a seemingly endless network of narrow tunnels branching off into the darkness, stretching for hundreds of miles beneath the earth. This is not a place built for the living, yet it is vibrantly, powerfully alive with meaning. While these subterranean passages were indeed a practical solution to a shortage of burial space and the high cost of land in ancient Rome, to view them as merely a city of the dead is to miss their true revolutionary significance. For the early Christian community, living under the constant threat of persecution and denied the right to bury their dead in common cemeteries, the catacombs became something far greater. They were a hidden sanctuary, a sacred landscape where they could not only lay their loved ones to rest but also freely express their faith, forge a powerful communal identity, and assert their unwavering hope in the promise of an afterlife. The emptiness we encounter here today, with most of the skeletal remains long since removed to other ossuaries, is not a void of abandonment. It is a hallowed space that allows us to see the incredible artistry and raw courage etched into every inch of these tunnels, telling a story of a people who found light in the deepest darkness. The most immediately striking feature of the catacombs is their sheer, repetitive structure. The walls are lined floor to ceiling with horizontal niches known as loculi. These were the standard burial spots for the common people, simple rectangular slots carved directly into the soft volcanic tufa rock. Each loculus held one or two bodies, wrapped in a shroud and sealed with a slab of marble or terracotta tiles, which were then cemented shut. The simplicity and uniformity of these niches speak to a powerful egalitarian ethos within the early Christian community. In death, as in their faith, they were all equal. There were no grand mausoleums for the wealthy here. The senator and the slave were laid to rest side by side in identical graves, a stark contrast to the highly stratified society above ground. This organizational design was not just spiritual, it was incredibly efficient. The builders excavated in a precise, grid-like pattern, creating multiple levels connected by steep staircases, maximizing every possible inch of space. The tunnels themselves are narrow, often allowing only one person to pass at a time, creating an intimate, winding path that feels both protective and isolating. Walking through them, you get a palpable sense of a community working within severe constraints, using ingenuity and solidarity to create a dignified resting place for every single member. But to focus only on the loculi is to see only the skeleton of the catacombs. Their true heart and soul are revealed in the more open spaces that punctuate this underground network, the small family tombs known as cubicula, and the larger assembly areas. It is here, away from the endless rows of sealed niches, that the community's spirit truly comes alive. The walls and ceilings of these chambers are covered with some of the earliest and most beautiful Christian art in existence. The frescoes are not grandiose or meant to impress with technical prowess. They are tender, symbolic, and full of coded meaning. You see images of the Good Shepherd, a young man carrying a lamb on his shoulders, a potent symbol of Christ's care and salvation. There are depictions of Jonah being swallowed and then released by the sea monster, representing death and resurrection. Scenes of communal meals, often interpreted as celebrations of the Eucharist, show figures breaking bread together, reinforcing the bonds of faith and fellowship. These paintings were more than decoration. They were a visual language of hope and instruction. For a persecuted community unable to worship openly, these hidden galleries served as a clandestine church, a place where they could gather to remember their dead, celebrate their faith, and draw strength from these images that assured them of God's deliverance and the joy that awaited them in paradise. The emotional weight of these spaces is almost overwhelming when you consider the context in which they were created. Every scoop of earth removed, every body carried down in secret under cover of night, every brushstroke applied to a damp wall was an act of defiance and profound courage. The catacombs are a physical monument to a people who refused to let fear dictate their practices or erase their identity. They stored their dead not just in the physical sense, but in the spiritual sense, carefully placing them in the arms of their faith community, surrounded by the stories of their belief. The design itself provided solace. The very act of creating this hidden world was a way to exert control in a world where they had very little. It was a way to say, "We are here, we are a community, and we will endure." The emptiness of the loculi today allows this narrative of resilience to take center stage. We are not distracted by the human remains. Instead, we are confronted by the powerful intention behind it all. We see the careful chisel marks in the rock, the faded colors of the frescoes, the soot marks from oil lamps that once guided the way. We can almost hear the echoes of whispered psalms and quiet prayers that once floated through these passages. This vast underground city demonstrates, perhaps more powerfully than any other vault we have explored, that a storage space can hold infinitely more than physical objects. It can store hope, it can store identity, it can store the collective memory and unwavering courage of an entire community. The Roman catacombs are not a morbid relic. They are a testament to the human spirit's ability to create light, meaning, and sanctuary even in the face of persecution and death. Their design provided more than just a solution to a logistical problem. It provided a hidden cradle for a fledgling faith, protecting it and nurturing it until it could finally emerge into the light of day. In their silent, empty tunnels, they hold the profound emotional and historical weight of a people who dug deep, both literally and figuratively, to safeguard their most sacred beliefs and their very right to remember their dead with love and devotion. Now let's shift our gaze to the warm, vibrant landscapes of West Africa, where the very architecture of community was built not from stone, but from earth, straw, and human connection. Here, the most important bank in any village was not made of marble but of mud. Picture a family compound after a successful harvest. The air is filled with a sense of accomplishment, and standing proudly throughout the space are rows of elegant, often pot-bellied structures, the traditional grain silos. Crafted from coiled clay or woven grass and often perched on stone platforms or wooden stilts, these are not mere containers. They are the community's lifeblood, the physical manifestation of a family's hard work and a society's deepest values. Their elegant, organic forms, now often silent and empty, stand as beautiful sculptural reminders of a world where storage was not a private affair, but a public promise of mutual survival and shared prosperity. The construction of these silos was a masterclass in appropriate technology, using locally available materials to solve very specific environmental challenges. In the humid, pest-rich climate, keeping grain dry and safe from insects and rodents was paramount. The solution was found in elevation and insulation. By building the silos on raised platforms, creators put a critical barrier between their precious harvest and the damp earth, while also making it harder for scavengers to access it. The materials themselves were brilliantly chosen. Mud, when mixed with straw or dung and properly dried, creates a thick, breathable wall that regulates internal temperature and humidity, preventing the buildup of condensation that would lead to mold. In other regions, skilled weavers would create large, basket-like silos from grasses, their tight weave keeping pests out while still allowing air to circulate. This was not a technology imported from elsewhere. It was a hyper-local, evolved response to the land itself, a perfect example of working in harmony with the environment to create a sustainable, zero-energy preservation system. But to see only the physical function is to miss the entire point. The size, number, and placement of these silos within a family compound were a silent yet powerful language. A compound with many large, well-maintained silos was broadcasting a clear message of success, stability, and wealth, a wealth measured not in coins but in food security. This was a sign that the family had been good stewards of their land, that they had planned wisely, and that they had enough to contribute to the community's well-being. More importantly, the placement of these storage units was never hidden away. They were integrated into the heart of the communal living space, clustered around shared courtyards. This was a deliberate design choice that fostered a culture of transparency and mutual obligation. Everyone could see the state of everyone else's stores. This visibility was a built-in social safety net. It was immediately apparent which families might need support after a poor season, and which had enough to share. The silos, therefore, were not symbols of hoarding but of responsibility. Their prominence encouraged a constant, quiet accounting of the community's collective resources, ensuring that no one would be left behind when times were hard. The profound emptiness found in many of these structures today tells a story of a changing world. The shift towards modern, large-scale agriculture and the introduction of metal drums and plastic containers have rendered these traditional methods less common. In some regions, climate change and shifting weather patterns have disrupted the ancient agricultural cycles that these silos were designed to support. Yet this void allows us to appreciate their form and their function with new clarity. We are not distracted by the contents, we are focused on the container and all that it represents. We see the graceful curves shaped by human hands, the careful layers of plaster, the skillful weaving of grasses. We understand that these were not just storage jars, they were the foundational nodes in a resilient, decentralized food network. Each silo was a personal savings account of nourishment, and together, they formed a community bank that guaranteed everyone's survival. This elegant African vault offers a crucial perspective in our modern world of globalized supply chains and anonymous supermarkets. It reconnects us to the most fundamental equation of human society, that food security is the absolute bedrock of all other security. It demonstrates that the most effective systems are often those that are deeply embedded in social and cultural practices, where the act of storing food is inseparable from the acts of sharing, cooperation, and building trust. The empty grain silo is not a relic of a forgotten past. It is a timeless lesson in resilience, a model of sustainability that is both practical and profoundly beautiful. It reminds us that before we built vaults for gold, we built containers for life, and that the strongest community is not the one with the most money in the bank, but the one with the most grain stored in its heart. Now, let us step through the heavy oak door of a respectable Victorian townhouse, leaving behind the communal silos and spiritual treasuries for the intensely private, cluttered world of the 19th century middle and upper-class home. Here, amidst the plush drapes, mahogany furniture, and the constant rustle of crinoline, a new kind of anxiety was taking root, and with it, a new kind of vault was born. This was not a fortress for state wealth or a sanctuary for sacred texts. This was a deeply personal stronghold, a secret chamber designed to safeguard the very pillars of a family's identity and social standing. The Victorian safe room, or the built-in private safe, often concealed behind a swiveling portrait or a sliding bookshelf panel, is a fascinating window into a society grappling with unprecedented change, where the desire for public display was perfectly matched by a paranoia about what lay behind the curtain. The design of these domestic vaults is a masterclass in psychological discretion. Unlike the imposing bank vaults of the era, which were meant to intimidate with their sheer mass, the home safe was meant to disappear. Its primary defense was secrecy. A popular and ingenious method was to integrate it into the very fabric of the room's decor. A heavy, gilt-framed painting of a stern ancestor might swing outward on a silent pivot to reveal the iron door behind it. A section of intricately carved wood paneling might slide aside at a gentle push on the right rosette. This wasn't just a clever trick, it was a performance of normalcy. It allowed the homeowner to present a flawless, elegant facade to guests while harboring a core of steel just inches away. The locks on these safes were often miniature works of art in themselves, complex lever mechanisms, early combination dials disguised as decorative fixtures, and keys that were themselves ornate objects, meant to be carried on a watch chain as a subtle badge of responsibility and trust. The very act of concealing the safe's existence was the first and most important layer of security, reflecting a world where reputation was everything and any public admission of vulnerability was a social sin. But what was so desperately important that it required this level of clandestine protection? The contents tell a story of a society obsessed with lineage, legality, and the trappings of gentility. Inside, one would typically find the documents that defined a family's very existence: last wills and testaments, property deeds, stocks and bonds, and life insurance policies. In an era before digital records and cloud storage, the loss of a single piece of paper could mean financial ruin or a bitter inheritance dispute. Alongside these dry legalities were the symbols of achieved status: the wife's jewelry, not just for adornment but as a form of liquid capital and family heirloom, the sovereigns and guineas kept for emergencies, and often the most private of correspondences and diaries, guarding the intimate secrets that could shatter a carefully constructed public image. This small, hidden space was therefore the physical nucleus of the Victorian family's empire. It protected not just their wealth, but their legacy, their honor, and their most intimate selves from the prying eyes of servants, guests, and a rapidly changing world outside that felt increasingly uncertain. This profound need for domestic security did not emerge from a vacuum. The Victorian era was a time of dramatic social upheaval. The Industrial Revolution had created vast new wealth, but it also concentrated it, widening the gap between the classes and fueling a growing fear of crime. Sensationalized stories in the new popular press told of clever burglars and unscrupulous servants, making every unfamiliar noise in the night a potential threat. Furthermore, the rise of a prosperous middle class meant that more families than ever before had significant valuables to protect within their own homes, not in a bank. They were living embodiments of self-made success, and everything they had worked for was physically present under their roof. The safe room was a direct response to this anxiety, a tangible solution to an intangible fear of loss and social dissent. It was a box built to hold the dream of stability in a world that felt increasingly unstable. The emptiness of these spaces today, often found with doors ajar and interiors dusty, allows us to study them not as functioning safes, but as artifacts of a bygone mindset. With the valuables long since removed, we can appreciate the intricate scrollwork on the lock plate, the surprising heft of the door, and the cleverness of the concealment mechanism itself. This void invites us to contemplate the psychology of the people who used them. The act of locking away one's most precious possessions in a hidden compartment is a powerful ritual of control. In a life filled with the uncertainties of health, business, and social standing, the safe was one thing that could be definitively secured. It offered the illusion of absolute order and privacy, a small, dark universe where the patriarch or matriarch could exert complete authority. The Victorian safe room, therefore, is more than a relic of security technology. It is a narrative chamber, a silent confession of the fears and aspirations of an entire era. It tells a story of a society that built its finest homes with beautiful, well-lit parlors for public show, and small, dark, incredibly strong boxes hidden in the walls to hold everything they were truly afraid of losing. From the hidden anxieties of the Victorian home, we now plunge into the most terrifying and technologically advanced vaults ever conceived by humankind, spaces designed not to protect life, but to facilitate its potential end on a planetary scale. Let us descend into the reinforced concrete heart of a Cold War missile silo. The air is sterile, chilled by massive air handlers, and carries the metallic tang of machinery and a profound, unnerving silence. Above, a multi-ton blast door, engineered to withstand a near-direct nuclear hit, lies permanently sealed open, a gaping mouth to a subterranean world of pure, calculated paranoia. These decommissioned Titan or Minuteman silos, now empty of their intercontinental ballistic missiles, are not mere abandoned bunkers. They are the ultimate architectural expression of a 50-year standoff between superpowers, a terrifying blend of space-age engineering and doomsday ideology. Their chilling emptiness today is not an absence, but a presence, the overwhelming presence of the fear that built them. A fear so powerful it literally moved mountains of earth and consumed national treasuries to carve these tombs for weapons meant to never be used. The engineering of these silos is a horrifying marvel of negative functionality. Every single design decision was a response to an unimaginable worst-case scenario. Primary goal was not habitability, but survivability and retaliation. The silo itself is a gargantuan shock absorber. The missile was not simply placed on the floor. It was suspended within a complex web of hydraulic systems and gimbals, a setup designed to keep the weapon level and functional even as the Earth itself heaved and shuddered from the detonation of nearby warheads. The walls are not just thick, they are immensely thick, made of continuously poured concrete reinforced with steel rebar, forming a hardened shell intended to isolate the missile from the apocalypse unfolding above. Then there are the blast doors, feats of counterintuitive engineering. They are not meant to keep people out. They are meant to contain the cataclysmic fury of the missile's own launch, directing the incredible fireball and thrust up and out through the exhaust ducts, all while protecting the delicate electronics and the crew deep within the launch control center. This is architecture built to operate at the very brink of self-destruction, a machine designed to function perfectly in the opening minutes of the world's end. Adjacent to the silo lies the true human vault, the launch control capsule. This is where the psychological dimension of the Cold War becomes terrifyingly real. Buried even deeper, these capsules were designed to sustain a two-person crew for weeks in complete isolation after a nuclear attack. The life support systems were entirely self-contained, scrubbing carbon dioxide from the air and producing oxygen, with enough food and water in sealed containers to outlast the radioactive fallout, rendering the surface world uninhabitable. The communication systems were a study in paranoid redundancy, hardened landlines, extremely low-frequency radios that could communicate with submerged submarines, and backups for the backups. All of this technology served one grim purpose: to ensure that even if the United States had been utterly destroyed, these isolated crews could still receive a launch order and, following strict protocols, turn their keys to initiate a counterstrike. This concept is known as mutually assured destruction, and the launch capsule is its physical, claustrophobic heart. The design ensured there was no exit, no way out, until the mission was complete or the supplies ran out. It was a tomb for the living, a vault that stored not objects but the final, terrible command of a dead nation. The profound emptiness of these spaces today is one of the most complex silences we have encountered. Walking through them now, with the missile long since removed and the control panels stripped of their classified components, is a deeply surreal and sobering experience. The void where the weapon once stood is staggering in its scale, a physical absence that somehow feels heavier than the presence of the 70-foot-tall rocket itself. The emptiness invites a chilling kind of reflection. We are forced to confront the sheer absurdity and terror of the logic that created them, the fact that for decades, global stability hinged on the promise of total annihilation, and that entire societies devoted their greatest scientific and economic resources to building and maintaining these monuments to that promise. The silence is not peaceful. It is the silence of a threat suspended, of a nightmare put on pause. This final vault redefines our concept of storage to its absolute limit. It was not built to preserve culture, wealth, or life. It was built to store the capability for omnicide, the total destruction of our species. Its design is the absolute convergence of engineering and ideology, where cutting-edge technology was deployed in the service of the darkest possible human impulse. The empty silo stands as a permanent question mark etched into the landscape. It is a warning and a relic, a symbol of a time when humanity's ingenuity was so brilliantly focused on the mechanics of its own potential extinction. It demonstrates, in the most stark terms imaginable, that the spaces we design are direct reflections of our deepest fears and our most powerful obsessions. In its hollowed-out cavern, we are left to wonder if we built these vaults to protect us, or if we simply became prisoners of the terrifying logic we stored inside them. What becomes truly breathtaking as we reflect on this journey is not the uniqueness of each vault, but the powerful, recurring themes that echo across continents and millennia. These 28 silent chambers, from the wind-swept Cas of the Andes to the claustrophobic launch capsules of the Cold War, are not isolated curiosities. They are individual verses in a much larger, universal human poem. When we step back and listen to their collective silence, a profound chorus of shared priorities emerges, revealing the core anxieties, genius, and aspirations that have driven us since the dawn of civilization. The first and most primal thread weaving through every story is the fundamental drive for security. But security means something different to every culture. For the Vikings, it meant secrecy, hiding wealth in a nondescript pit, trusting only memory and the anonymity of nature. For the Mycenaeans, it meant monumental intimidation, building a tomb so massive and imposing it would deter thieves through sheer scale. The Inca chose strategic dispersal, scattering their stores across a vast empire to buffer against regional famine. And in the 20th century, security reached its terrifying zenith with the missile silo, a vault designed to protect not its contents from the world, but the world from its contents. The threat evolved from rival raiders and natural disaster to the abstract specter of global annihilation, and the architecture evolved in lockstep, from simple pits to hardened concrete fortresses buried deep within the earth. This progression shows that our storage solutions are a direct mirror of our deepest fears, a physical manifestation of what we perceive as the greatest danger to our survival. Yet the response to these threats was never just about building stronger walls. It was about brilliant, elegant adaptation to the local environment, a theme that showcases human ingenuity at its most resourceful. Civilizations didn't just fight their surroundings, they learned to harness them. The Nabateans in the waterless desert of Petra became masters of capture and filtration, turning entire cliff faces into water catchment systems. The ancestral Pueblones in the high desert used the earth itself as a natural refrigerator, digging down to the thermally stable zone to preserve their harvest. The Inuit of the Arctic did something similar but in reverse, using the perpetual cold of the permafrost as a freeze that required no energy beyond the initial labor of digging. And the builders of the Persian Karnak performed what seems like magic, tapping into distant mountain aquifers and guiding the water through gently sloping underground tunnels to make the desert bloom. In each case, the design of the vault is a love letter to the local landscape, a demonstration of a people who observed their world with exquisite care and learned to work with its forces rather than against them. The vault becomes less a defiance of nature and more a collaboration with it. Perhaps the most beautiful and poignant common thread is the seamless integration of the spiritual with the practical. For most of human history, these two concepts were not separate. To store something vital was in itself a sacred act. The Egyptian temple storerooms were aligned with celestial events, their walls covered in hieroglyphs that magically ensured a perpetual abundance. The act of placing grain in those rooms was a ritual to maintain the cosmic order of Maat. The Maya Choltons, while brilliantly functional cisterns, also became portals to the underworld, their cool, dark depths serving as a place to communicate with the gods of rain and fertility. In the Gothic cathedral crypt, the sacred relics were not merely stored, they were enshrined within an architecture engineered for transcendence, where darkness, cool air, and echoing sounds worked in concert to create an atmosphere of awe. This fusion tells us that for our ancestors, the line between survival and sanctity was blurry, if it existed at all. Ensuring the community had enough to eat was a spiritual duty, and protecting the tools of ritual was as vital as protecting the food supply. The design of their vaults had to satisfy both the body and the soul. Finally, these empty spaces speak volumes about the social values of the cultures that built them. They are physical blueprints of a society's deepest principles. The uniform, egalitarian loculi of the Roman catacombs scream of an early Christian community that believed in equality in death, a stark contrast to the stratified society above ground. The prominent, open placement of the African grain silos within the family compound fostered a culture of transparency and mutual obligation, where everyone could see the state of the community's food reserves. The Inca Quilca system was the ultimate expression of a state that saw its primary duty as the equitable distribution of resources to prevent famine, a massive, empire-wide insurance policy. And the Victorian safe room, hidden behind a swiveling painting, reveals a society obsessed with the new concepts of privacy, individual wealth, and the anxiety of protecting a carefully constructed public image. In every case, the architecture reveals what the culture valued most. Was it communal sharing or individual ownership, spiritual duty or economic control? Public transparency or private secrecy, the vault doesn't just store objects, it stores a culture's core beliefs, frozen in stone and mortar for us to decipher. This is the ultimate gift of their emptiness. With the distraction of treasure removed, we are left with the pure, unadulterated design. we are forced to see the ventilation shaft not as a feature of a granary, but as the brilliant practical innovation that it is. We can appreciate the acoustic properties of Othello's tomb as a deliberate spiritual tool. We can understand the alignment of a doorway with a star not as a frivolous decoration, but as a critical cosmological statement. The void allows the architecture itself to sing its own story, free from the glitter of the objects it once held. These spaces are not abandoned, they are waiting. They are volumes filled with meaning, not voids emptied of it. They invite us to listen closely to their silent lessons about fear and faith, survival and spirituality, the individual and the collective. They remind us that the most enduring stories are not always found in the treasures we unearth, but in the profound, intelligent, and beautiful spaces we create to hold them. As we conclude our journey through these 28 silent chambers, a powerful truth comes into focus. The most compelling narratives of our past are not always written on parchment or cast in gold. Often, they are etched into the very stone and earth of the spaces built to hold our most precious treasures. From the wind-ventilated granaries of Mohenjo-Daro that whispered of a society's foresight, to the terrifying, earth-buried silos of the Cold War that screamed of global paranoia, each empty vault we've explored is a chapter in the ongoing story of humanity. They are not voids of absence, but volumes of intention. They reveal our deepest fears of scarcity and invasion, our highest aspirations for eternity and community, and our brilliant, relentless ingenuity in the face of every challenge the world and our own nature has thrown at us. These structures challenge our modern obsession with material wealth, asking us to shift our gaze from the treasure to the chest itself. They ask us to see the profound artistry in emptiness, to appreciate the careful planning of an Inca Qulqas ventilation system, the symbolic power of an Egyptian tomb's celestial ceiling, and the resilient hope encoded in the hidden passages of a Celtic souterrain. This is where we find the true fingerprints of human thought, not in the objects that were plundered or decayed, but in the enduring intelligence of the design that remains. Let these silent sentinels inspire you to look differently at the world around you, to find the stories hidden in plain sight, in the overlooked architecture of our everyday lives and the forgotten ruins of the ancient world. For it is in these spaces, shaped by human hands for human purposes, that we can truly hear the echoes of those who came before us. We would love to hear which of these 28 vaults resonated most deeply with you. Was it the communal spirit of the African grain silos, the spiritual devotion of the Himalayan treasury, or the chilling logic of the missile silo? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue the conversation. If you enjoyed this journey into the silent stories of history, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the world's greatest historical mysteries. Thank you for listening, for wondering, and for walking with us through these empty spaces. Remember, history is not only about what was left behind. It is also, and perhaps most profoundly, about the careful, thoughtful, and beautiful spaces we created to hold it. Sometimes, the most powerful stories are not told by the objects that fill a room, but by the resonant, enduring silence they leave